Lawyers. Which fictional villain would be a slam dunk to defend in court? Robbie Rotten. I mean, his crimes mostly just aren't? Does Dr. Doom even need a legal defense? As the ruler of his own country, does diplomatic immunity cover all of his actions? I mean, that's how he keeps getting away with things in the comics, right? He's the legal sovereign leader of a respected modern country, so he can't be arrested for fear of provoking a war. They did try a few times, replacing him with someone who has a better legal right to the country, but they always turn out to be crazy tyrants, as opposed to Dr. Doom, who's generally at least a reasonable dictator. So he usually wins it back. Provided you can put up with his egotism and restrictions, the overall standard of living seems pretty good. The trains are almost certainly running on time. Plus, before Doom, it was a backwater, tiny Eastern European nation that changed hands every few decades to increasingly worse options. Now it's a major global superpower with some of the most advanced technology on the planet. Whatever your opinion on Doom personally, on some level, that must feel good. Most of the old-school Scooby-Doo villains, they didn't really do anything other than scare people off their private property. I mean, most of them were doing so for illegal reasons though, like insurance fraud or tax evasion or whatever. When I was a kid, I remember being devastated in the movie Big Daddy when the social worker took Zack and Cody away from Adam Sandler. But after watching it again as an adult, although I'm still sad, I'm thinking, yeah, fricking of course they're going to take him away from this stranger. So the social worker from Big Daddy is a layup case. Not to mention Sandler's character literally lied to social services so his unemployed, lazy butt could have a child. That guy should have been arrested. In the same vein, Mrs. Doubtfire. Daniel couldn't hold down a job or apartment, so of course he wasn't in a position to have joint custody. But then he literally dresses up as an old woman and deceives his entire family to have time with his kids. Then they take the kids away, like of course they're going to remove the children from someone who's unstable enough to see assuming a new identity and lying to my whole family as a better alternative to get my crap together so I can see my kids. Definitely Lex Luthor. 99% of the time he uses henchmen who won't talk, and he can definitely pay my exorbitant bills. We're going to get a lot of variation on the answers here today, and I think this one, the villain who is definitely in the wrong, but very good at concealing it and would be a great repeat client, is a very interesting answer. And classic lawyer, defending a scumbag if the bill is high enough. Who am I kidding? I'd probably burn down a kindergarten for that sort of money. Mojo Jojo. This one is good because typically animals can't commit crimes. They'd have to establish legal personhood first. Animals may not be capable of committing crimes, but then they have no civil rights either, such as a right to trial or to legal representation. If you rely on non-personhood as a defense, he gets sent to a zoo at best, or at worst, put down. It's the defense that wants to prove personhood, not the state. You know, I could mount a pretty solid wrongful death case on behalf of the boy who cried wolf. Bucky Barnes or the Winter Soldier. I think the insanity defense, though it's not called that anymore, would actually apply here. Get a group of certified expert psychiatrists and doctors together, get their testimony and depositions, set a competency hearing, and in the event he's deemed competent, use witness testimony and the USSR and Hydra documentation to prove he wasn't in charge of his actions. Boom. Done. In my jurisdiction, I'd say Damien from The Omen. Minimum age for delinquency adjudication is 12, and in the first movie he's 5, so he couldn't be tried for any of his evil doings. Plus, it's not illegal to be the devil's offspring, particularly when the devil himself is a lawyer. We all know about devil's advocate, right? Dr. Doofenshmirtz. All of his inventions ultimately only end up stealing or damaging the creations of 2 kids, so he could probably be let out with a theft charge. Really, he's just a very lonely, unloved man trying to be seen in the world. Good thing he has his therapy platypus. In some cases, his inventions could actually benefit society. I'm pretty sure there was one episode where someone took one of his inniters and it became a machine used by eye doctors to fix eye problems. Kronk from The Emperor's New Groove. He does technically kidnap Cusco, but I think we could get his sentence way reduced. Get enough character witnesses and you're golden. I think he could charm the jury. Or just completely blow up his own case in the stand. It could be a fun surprise. Just show them the movie. Even in the scenes where he literally commits a crime, he still seems to be a good person. He just works for a terrible person and is dumb as a rock. He could be reformed by a simple change of employer. The Wicked Witch of the West. She was angry at Dorothy, but then again, Dorothy dropped a house on her sister and then grave robbed the witch's sister's body with Glinda's help. The shoes were rightfully the witch's anyway, presuming she was her sister's only heir and her sister died intestate. You could argue that all the witch wanted was for Dorothy to apologize and return the slippers she stole. Everything else that happened was the result of the witch's reasonable attempts to defend herself and her property against Dorothy's killing, theft, and trespass. It would depend on the legal status of Dorothy's companions. I'm pretty sure that you can't attempt to burn someone to death like she does to the Scarecrow, just because they're traveling with someone who stole your shoes, even if they are attempting to prevent you from harming the person carrying stolen property. But the witch didn't actually set him on fire, though. She just sent down a fireball near him. You might be able to argue tortious assault or reasonable foreseeability leading to culpability for negligence, but it doesn't appear to be intentional battery. And she could argue that she was using the tools at her disposal to persuade Dorothy to return the slippers. I want to defend the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park. The velociraptors are probably sociopaths. They were raised in an alien environment by people who had no idea how their species rears their young and probably conditioned to act in a certain way for the entertainment of tourists. I'm not surprised they turned out to be aggressive monsters. Rumpelstiltskin did nothing wrong. It would have helped if the agreement was in writing. I'm also not familiar with adoption laws. I'm pretty sure it wouldn't fly in a surrogate situation in my state either. But I know if the contract was for anything legal other than a baby, he'd have a solid case. The bears in Goldilocks. Or is Goldilocks the villain there? Breaking and entering? Theft? Yeah, Goldilocks is the villain, and it would be very hard to defend her since she was found at the scene of the crime. Many countries have laws in place allowing a person in a situation, such as being lost in the wilderness, to commit property crimes for the sake of survival. Essentially, if you're freezing and starving in the woods and come across a cabin, you can break in, get warm, and raid the kitchen. Be sure to check local laws before getting lost in the woods. They might require you to just fricking die instead. Probably Gaston, since hunting a beast that's a threat to members of your own town isn't a crime. Remember, Beast did lock up Belle's dad, and there's no reason to believe Beast couldn't go evil again during the inevitable divorce. If you mean the one I'm going to most enjoy defending, then pick the richest one. It's a criminal client. Write me a check and don't call me every damn 10 minutes from the jail, and I'm a happy camper. Also, for Gaston, the whole town was in on the angry mob. Try finding an impartial jury in that small provincial town. Smaug. He had to be considered an adverse possessor of the property after all that time, and the House of Durin did abandon the property. I think he had a right to defend his home. Although I'll admit, maybe I'm holding out for a statute of limitations on the whole burning the city thing when he first arrived. The bad guy attorney in the B movie would have killed the case if any actual lawyering occurred. He went to court against a bug and an insane woman. The whole case was kangaroo from the beginning. The funniest part of that movie is that the entire trial is watched by a jury, and then the judge just rules in favor of the plaintiff at the end. What the heck was there a jury there for? Also, two attorneys attack each other and a witness tries to kill a crossing attorney, which are both grounds for a mistrial. Well, a lot of these more cartoony ones get a lot more funny if you imagine a real lawyer sitting in the court absolutely gobsmacked about the shenanigans going on. I want to see how a real-life court reacts if a judge grossly oversteps their powers this way. Everybody's favorite, Gaston. The beast is basically kidnapping people, and you can argue that he's violent. Heck, the entire village was on Gaston's side and would acquit him. No one frames like Gaston, dodges claims like Gaston. No one's legal team shifts all the blame like Gaston. It's kind of scary how little of what went on in the Truman Show would actually be illegal in the real world. There's a few fringe cases, most notably actively preventing Truman from leaving once he realized he was in a fake world and expressed a desire to escape, but pretty much everything up to that point is very legal, and it would be hard to press charges against the director or anyone else for the basic premise of raising a child in a reality show without their knowledge. Seems like a very easy case of invasion of privacy, probably a handful of other niche torts, maybe unlawful hiring, employment practices, and failing to pay an employee wages. Very good points, and there's actually a great podcast called Ad Absurdum that goes into it in more detail. A lot of the stuff can be gotten around through a couple of things. First, the corporation in the movie is Truman's legal parent and as such can sign away most of his rights on his behalf until he's an adult. Second, it wouldn't be hard to raise Truman to not value his privacy, making it easy to get him to sign it away once he turns 18. Third, they could be paying him a salary and just putting it into an account in his name, including the fine print in his employment contract, which he signed that includes television appearances. And finally, Truman could probably take them to the cleaners in civil court, but it would be hard to stick many of the criminal charges. I think it would be fun defending Saul from Better Call Saul. Ursula, that freedom of contract all day. Ariel was a minor and she signed the contract without a parent or guardian present. I'll see you in court. What about her using hench-shields to disrupt the other party to the contract? That contract was not made in good faith, since she went out of her way to personally stop Ariel from being able to fulfill it. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Probably Palpatine. Republic law doesn't apply because he can bend it. Also, as Supreme Chancellor, he probably has immunity. Imperial law doesn't apply either because I assume he's untouchable there. And real-world law could also be tricky. All of his dirty work was done by his students who are conveniently dead. Good luck proving they did anything on his orders. Being a Sith Lord isn't a crime because of freedom of religion, right? His fight against the Jedi was self-defense as it was an attack against him with religious motives. Even the killing of Hago Damask would be impossible to prove as there were no witnesses and nobody even knew they were on Coruscant together. And the creation of the Empire was approved by the Senate. He didn't even abduct Maul, he was given to him. The most realistic thing would be conspiracy to destroy the Republic or something, but it sounds like a conspiracy theory to claim that there was this big Sith rule of two thing going on for centuries. And even if it got to trial somehow, if it is a jury trial, the opposition would have a very hard time. The Joker. Your Honor, my client, who is clearly suffering from schizophrenic delusions and various other mental issues, was punched in the face by a billionaire in a rubber gimp suit. And worse, the Gotham City Police Commissioner asked him to do it. I don't think you could save the Joker from legal repercussions with the insanity plea. For insanity, your client would need to either not realize what they were doing, or not be able to realize that what they were doing was considered wrong by the law. The Joker is clearly aware of what he's doing, and he's aware that it's wrong. That said, you could probably get Bruce Wayne charged for vigilantism, and you could probably get Commissioner Gordon fired for working with Batman. Scar. Yes, he murdered his brother, attempted to murder his nephew, and turned his entire family into slaves, but he's a cat. Just show some of his baby pictures to the jury, a few videos of him trying to eat Zazu, and after a few, he'd walk away as a free cat. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, my client was just cat-pushing something off a ledge. The evil stepmother from Cinderella. The worst thing she did was make Cinderella work a lot, but if she's old enough to marry, then she's old enough to help out around the house. Also, women had fewer rights. There's probably not a crime she even committed against Cinderella. I'd argue that the stepmother emotionally abused her, though. It wasn't just making her work a lot, it was making her do all the work, while the stepsisters didn't have to, so neglecting one child while the others are treated better. Also, from what I remember, they destroy her dress and lock her in her room against her will. I feel like Ganondorf would be a nice pick. According to the laws of the Hylian world, he's just supposed to be doing evil stuff all the time. The curse has to be fulfilled through generations. There's always a hero, an evil person, and a goddess. Kinda like a contract, eh? A theory I like about Ganondorf is that he's as much cursed as Link and Zelda are. A perpetuous cycle of fights between good and evil just because one dude thousands of years ago was annoyed about losing against a 17-year-old. I'm not a lawyer, but Sauron. He was simply trying to get a treasure that was stolen from him while employing orcs whom the rest of the races are very racist towards. Well, clearly, this theory is ignoring the fact that he's explicitly instructing these poor disenfranchised orcs to commit property damage, murder, and holding numerous war camps without proper sanitation or obedience of noise control ordinances. A follow-up comment makes yet another good point that opens up the possibility for a great show about Sauron's legal exploits after the Rings of Power inevitably falls through. I mean, once the Ring of Power left the borders of Mordor, he'd had to follow the rules and laws of whichever country he was attempting to reacquire the ring from. Ursula. Basic contract action. Ariel might have been a minor, but that only makes the contract voidable, not invalid. At no point did Ariel ask to void the contract. Instead, her father decided to sign his own contract. King Triton is a sophisticated party who entered into a binding contract. King Triton was the one who was willing to throw his kingdom away to bail out his favorite daughter. You also have a good estoppel argument because Ariel materially benefited from the contract, which oftentimes can supersede the voidability question with minors. Tulkinghorn from Bleak House, Old Man Potter from It's a Wonderful Life, Cruella de Vil. I would never take a case involving Dr. House or Sherlock Holmes, though. Good luck having Cruella on the stand and not having the jury turn against you. Hans from Frozen. I'm not a lawyer, but he basically wanted to legally become ruler of a kingdom through marriage. You could make a credible case that Elsa was a threat to the kingdom, and that she was unfit to rule since she accidentally harmed her own sister. Hans going after her was an effort to protect the kingdom. He even stopped a henchman from shooting her in the chest, so he was clearly trying to use the least amount of violence necessary. I'm not a lawyer, but Jason Voorhees is defending himself from trespassers. Thanos, because he did nothing wrong. I knew this one was going to come up. I mean, he did kill Vision. At the very least, it's property damage. I'm not a lawyer, but Umbridge from Harry Potter because she never committed a single crime. In fact, she changed rules and laws specifically so she could do what she did. The worst action she committed was making Harry write with a quill that scarred him. However, we know from Filch that corporal punishment within schools is still allowed in the wizarding world, and the only reason it doesn't continue at Hogwarts is because Dumbledore doesn't allow it. With Dumbledore gone, the headmistress is well within her rights to bring back the practice. Ed Rooney from Ferris Bueller's Day Off. He's just trying to do his job. I would not want to defend the actor who played him, of course. Rooney was probably fine until the end of the movie when he attempted to break into the Bueller's house. Did he actually enter? Now I'm forgetting that scene. Actually, Cracked.com pointed out that because Ferris's parents called him out of school, the absence was excused no matter what the heck Ferris did with it. Ferris could have gone on the field at Wrigley and hit the game-winning home run and dedicated the win to Rooney himself and then drove to the school and handed Rooney the game ball, and Rooney could do two things. Nothing and like it. Norman Bates. Could not be an easier insanity plea, and if I had to go to trial, I could just find one juror who hated his mother. Professor Pig from Batman. That dude is actually crazier than the Joker. Well, the human experimentation bit seems like it would be a bit difficult to defend. Squidward. He just wanted a calm life with a clarinet, but SpongeBob and Patrick kept annoying him, not giving a chill and calm life. Look, Sid from Toy Story is a sadistic kid, but he's a juvenile, and homicide of toys isn't a thing, so that's always helpful. The Joker because I just play the insanity card and I'm not even a lawyer. The Joker doesn't display the kind of insanity required for that defense to work. Generally, you'd need to show that the defendant didn't know what he was doing, and if he did, didn't understand it was wrong. This would be like if you had delusions that made you think a random passerby was an evil alien coming to destroy Earth and you shot them. The Joker is clearly mentally unwell, but he doesn't seem to have this problem. As I understand the Joker, he just doesn't give a rat's butt about whether he's doing something bad. Being a psychopath or sociopath doesn't make you insane in the way to escape criminal liability. I know you want a lawyer, so this isn't like, how dare you not know this, but I think a lot of people misunderstand the insanity defense as a general rule. It's not just about being mentally ill, it has to be the right kind of insane. Kreese from Karate Kid and Cobra Kai. No defense needed since law enforcement basically doesn't exist in that universe. Agatha Harkness. What did she do that was so wrong exactly? The worst I can come up with is that she tried to stop someone with a notoriously out-of-control destructive history from continuing to mind-violate an entire town of people who were clearly traumatized by it. You're not wrong. I mean, she definitely had evil intent and was going to siphon all of that power for evil or something. I wasn't really paying attention. But yeah, if she had beaten Wanda and taken the kudos for stopping a supervillain, she probably would have been good. I'm not a lawyer, but I've got some. If King Boo hadn't gone out of his way to trap the Mario Bros, he could have pressed charges against Professor E. Gadd for imprisoning all of those ghosts into paintings and later trespassing on the mansion he magically created. Nasty Nork was wrongfully banished to a junkyard without due legal process and didn't actually attack the dragons until publicly provoked on live television, in such a way that one could try to frame it as the dragons doing it on purpose, as well as charging the dragons with harassment and neglecting due to process. GLaDOS was improperly programmed, and once the morality core was removed, no longer understood right from wrong, and thus could have a legit insanity plea, as she was programmed to only care about her experiments. Otto from Wall-E would have the same argument. HAL 9000 was acting in self-defense, as the humans on board wanted to shut him down over one single error. Frankenstein's monster was abandoned at birth and treated cruelly his whole life. Plus, he was living basically in the wild with nobody to teach him right from wrong, and thus one could convince the judge he needs psychiatric help. Also, the creature could press child neglect charges onto Victor Frankenstein. It would be hard to convict the Invisible Man, the original, not the crappy 2020 one, from anything because how do you even prove that he was there? And technically, he hadn't gone through with any of the crimes he wanted to commit. Most werewolves have no control over their actions either. Otto Octavius, aka Doc Ock. The neural interface affected his mind. He couldn't do much about it. It was his gallium arms that harmed people, not him. I'm not actually a lawyer, but this would be very hard to go up against, right? If you count Doofenshmirtz as a villain, then he'd be the easiest. I mean, he didn't do anything lasting. Gus Fring, because he'd absolutely have his alibis and defense plans schemed down to the most minute detail. All he would need would be an earnest and detail-oriented storyteller, and I can do that. What was the most WTF thing that a customer brought in to a second-hand shop? I worked at a weapons shop, and a shady-looking guy brought in a few pairs of night vision goggles, like high-end military-grade PVS-14 night vision goggles. I asked him why he was selling them. Oh, I just don't need them anymore. Oh, cool, man. Do you mind if I call the company real quick and run the numbers? Sometimes this stuff is stolen property. As soon as I said that, he jumped across the counter, grabbed the goggles, and bolted for the door. A guy brought in a stack of about 15 laptops that all said, "Property of Cleveland Public High School," right on the top of each one. He then threatened to shoot me when I told him to get out. Okay, because people are asking, yes, I'm aware that schools and businesses can sometimes sell off old laptops, which is why I don't flat out call the cops when someone brings in suspected stolen items. There's always the chance that no matter how obviously stolen it is, the person owns it legitimately. However, I'm not going to risk my job or my conscience by taking an item if it has a label on it claiming it's someone else's property. Also, how am I supposed to sell a laptop that says "property of city, public schools" on it? Pawn shops have a bad enough rap as it is. I know a few guys who've run these sort of shops. One thing I've seen was a guy who brought in smoke grenades and M249 saw belts that he had stolen from our local military drill center. Another was a guy at a local weapons store who brought in a piece that had an illegal oil filter suppressor on it. They told the guy to get the frick out and go destroy that thing. A buddy of mine worked at a pawn shop for a few years. They had a guy try to sell them a police walkie-talkie, like straight stolen from a car but with the battery taken out. They told him to get effed and called the cops. I believe they picked the guy up a few hours later. This just reminded me of my friend who pawned the DSLR camera I let him borrow for a school project. I asked for it back a good amount of times and not once did he tell me what he did with it. I had to hear it from someone else and then he claimed that I gave it to him. A man brought in a bag of white snow and asked if I would buy it, then resell it back to him in a couple of days. Bold plan on the part of the seller here. Unfortunately, there's no further detail as to whether they called the cops on them, but there is a pretty funny follow-up comment. "Hey boss, this guy just sold us like 10 kilos of white snow and wants to buy it back in a few days. Weird, what's the point in exchanging 5 kilos of substances back and forth? Is this some sort of scam? I don't know. When he comes back to pick up his 2.5 kilos, we'll have to ask about that." Not an owner, but I got a call from a pawn shop saying that one of my at-home employees tried to sell her work computer. It has my company's logo and contact info right on it, plain as day. How stupid can some people be? A school security guard pawned his service weapon and other equipment. He got caught by his supervisor carrying around a pellet shooter. I knew someone once who was into some bad stuff. He didn't have his school-provided laptop at class one day, and never again after that. As it turns out, it was his, for these laptops were indeed our own personal property, even though the school, quote, gave them to us. But the thing is, what they meant by giving each student a nice free laptop was overcharging the mother effers ×2 and building it into the price of tuition, and therefore the student loan. So I had that computer for a while, and he sold his to a pawn shop. How many college students do you know who would refuse a new MacBook Pro back in 2010 that they wouldn't have to pay for until they began paying back their student loans? A guy literally brought in a rocket-propelled grenade launcher. He was doing yard work for this old lady whose husband had passed. She gave it to him for doing some yard work, not realizing it was live and active. The guy was career military, and after the bomb squad came and disabled it, They went to her house and found a trove of similarly very illegal military-grade weapons. Just a worker at one of these stores, but we had a couple come in to pawn their backhoe over the weekends. Happens a lot, and brought their bill of sale. They wanted a simple $1,000 loan, which wasn't bad considering how much it was worth. No more than 30 minutes later, cops are there with the owner. Apparently they worked for him and went and pawned all of his industrial equipment. In a similar vein, my friend found some green herb in the oven he brought from a used appliance store. The shop called him to ask about the oven. Luckily, he didn't give out his address. I literally had a customer come in and say, "Hi, I've just stolen this phone off my sister. How much will you give me for it?" Also had a customer bring in 5 MacBooks at the same time with a certain logo on it which gave me the impression they were stolen. I told him to leave them with me for testing and called the police. Had another customer bring in a gun and a crossbow. That was weird. I'm in the UK and this is not a normal thing. Story from the 90s. My Fender Stratocaster was stolen and I reported it. Couple of years passed and an officer called me. "Your guitar serial number showed up at a pawn shop." "Great, so you know who stole it." "The guy who sold it at a pawn shop said it was a present from his girlfriend, but she died." "Okay, so I get my guitar back?" "No, the pawn shop already sold it." "Don't they have to check serial numbers?" "Yeah, but that can take 30 days and we can't expect them to hold on to this stuff forever." "What? So what do I do now?" "Nothing really." "So why are you calling me?" "I just thought you'd want to know. Bye." True story. Most stuff isn't even worth the time to report it stolen. You always got to look out for the people who bring in a crap ton of brand spanking new tools or electronics. Over time, you learn to read people based on their appearance, behavior, and personal information. An experienced broker can almost always immediately sleuth out whether they're stolen or not. In these cases, they mostly are. I've never had someone intentionally bring in illicit items, but it's important to check pockets and compartments on cases and similar things. It's not unheard of for some eclectic customer to forget about a little baggie of green herb that they'd stashed. One guy paid off his loan with cash, and there was a thin layer of white residue coating it. The first time I'd seen that one. And not illegal, but toward the beginning of the coronavirus outbreak, some wisecrack nutcase did try to sell us disinfectant. Funny, but also annoying. I wonder if that last guy had acquired all of his before eBay and Amazon had stopped letting others price gorge off them. If so, double screw that guy. I had this guitar that had a little sliding door on the side, meant to hold picks. I put green herb in there as a joke. I completely forgot about it as I was selling it. They were pretty chill. Oh god, there was this one really weird guy who brought in a dead duck while hunting is illegal in my area, and also just why? Wouldn't call this illegal per se, but I feel like I have to share this. A friend of mine owns a pawn shop and one day a guy walks in with a cardboard box filled to the top with his own number 2. He claims that it's magic and my friend cuts him off right there and kicks him out. As he's walking out, he drops the box by accident and gets all of his crap on the floor. Sees the mess he's made, stares at the horrid pile of feces for a couple of seconds and runs out of the shop. My friend never got his name and never saw him again. The smell would proceed to linger in the shop for a good month after it was cleaned up. I was in the US Army from the early 1990s until 2014, and I knew a guy like this in about 1993 or 94. Our whole unit moved from Fort Lewis, Washington, down to Fort Polk, Louisiana. This genius goes into the little local town and gets a Radio Shack credit card because active duty military members were pretty much immediately approved because of our guaranteed monthly income. Smart guy comes up with a great plan to buy a bunch of stuff at Radio Shack when he needed a few bucks, then take it down the road and sell it at the local pawn shop. It was all new equipment in a sealed box, so the pawn shop gave him about 15% of the retail price for everything he brought in. He just figured that after a few years, he'd be making enough money to pay off the credit card bills, or that the credit card company would just drop the charges. He was such a screw-up. He was being processed for discharge and he didn't even realize it. The last I saw, he was getting kicked out with nowhere to go afterward. I felt bad for him, but at the same time, I liked seeing him get messed over for knowingly messing over the system for so long. I was in a pawn shop when this happened. Someone brought in a wheelchair with the tag for the local hospital on the back. Example, property of somewhere hospital. The pawn shop owner told him to leave it and get out. They did, and he called the non-emergency line. The police came and picked it up and took it back to the hospital, Or that's what they said they were doing anyway. A friend of mine owns a shop. One day a woman walks in and asks if there's a female employee she could talk to. No problem, it's a family shop and his 18-year-old daughter comes out to help her. She asks to go out to her car where she opens the trunk. Whole thing is packed with bedroom toys, bondage stuff, outfits and a big box of phallic items. The woman says her sister who recently passed away sold this stuff at parties and she had no idea what to do with it. I used to work at a pawn store. A shady guy brought in a tiger skull. I don't remember if it was illegal or not, but the owner was yelling at him. He kept coming back and bringing animal skin and skulls. I think the police substance busted his house, from what the owner told me. A friend of mine owns a rather unique store with a lot of authentic medieval weaponry, armor, clothing, and similar. While I was there, a young couple decided his shop was the place to sell a few old SS daggers, belts, flags, and other Third Reich memorabilia. Solid logic, except for one thing. We're in Germany. Here, the state kind of frowns upon either owning or selling this stuff. They could have donated it to any museum and would have had no issue with the law whatsoever. I mean, it wasn't their fault they found it, right? But they figured that if Grandpa was from that particular organization, he could at least help with the funds for the renovations and decided cash was better than being named in a museum leaflet. My friend was mostly insulted by the idea. That's just because he owns a medieval store and sells historic weapons. I mean, he must know a collector for this sort of stuff that would pay cash, but that was the end of it. He told them to get out and donate it. Or if they insist on selling it, ship it to the US. More money from history buffs, or at least not one happy little German extremist with a new happy stabby toy. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I was on the receiving end of someone selling my stolen stuff at one of these stores. We had our house burgled in the UK. Me and my dad went to some pawn shops to give them a list of everything taken. While we were in there, someone came up to the counter and started unloading a bunch of stuff they want to sell, and it was our stuff. We got into a major incident inside the shop. The jerk manager of cash converters was saying it's nothing to do with him and to take it all outside. Sorry buddy, but when you're happy to buy a camera full of someone else's family photos, a laptop, and a bunch of other electronics from two junkies who look like they're homeless, no teeth, obvious signs of substance use, among other things, then it's absolutely 100% your problem to deal with. The police were called, junkies charged with handling stolen goods, and I got charged with attacking them. That was later dropped. Nobody charged with the actual burglary, so no real punishments for anyone involved. I don't know if it's necessarily illegal, but one time a guy brought me a handful of human teeth with bloody roots and gold fillings. He wanted me to extract the gold. I said, no thanks, bro. Even as a guy who works on a channel where we read objectively bat-crap crazy stuff all the time, I have to admit this one was a bit of a shock. So do people just think that all people who work at these shops are criminal fences or something? An MP40. Not actually me, but my significant other. He manages a store owned by a national chain. He brought it in on pawn, and as with all neat things, he was just waiting for the loan to drop after the 30 days of payment before the item went out on sale. At this point, he could purchase it. Now, I'm not a huge weapon historian, but I know the era and style and had to ask, that thing is super rare if it's not full auto. When a weapon is taken in on loan, the weapon is run, not the person, so our state's Bureau of Investigation was notified of its existence. Not only is a federal stamp for automatic weapons expensive as frick, it's also difficult to obtain, so he was no longer going to purchase it. And it's a good thing, because shortly after, the gun was seized by ATF, which is when we found out the actual worth, $10,000 to $20,000. Original owner brought it back as a war trophy, and the son is the one who got a loan, for like $200, but it was never registered, so it was contraband. I don't like pawn shops. My buddy had his surfboard stolen. A few weeks later, he found his board in a pawn shop. My buddy approached the staff and said it was his and that it was stolen. The staff then told him he had to buy the board back if he wanted it. The police were called because the board was reported stolen. Upon the arrival of the police, my buddy learned he still had to buy back the board if he wanted it back and then file a claim with the state to get his money back. Why does the state cover pawn shops selling stolen goods? Really nice old-looking farmer man walks in with a shotty with a barrel way too short. Long story short, boss brought it off him and immediately called the local police department to tell them. The cop asked if you could just remove the barrel and dispose of it as it was too much paperwork and hassle to come down and get it. The local police department are a fricking joke. A TV was stolen from my dad's office and sold to a pawn shop. This had been happening with yard decorations, and our neighbors told us what pawn shop to look at. Sure enough, it showed up, and at first the manager wouldn't provide any info or even care that we thought it was stolen. My dad then offered to buy it and requested that the TV be plugged in to check for defects. It worked just fine, and my dad said he'll take it, and then pulled the remote out of his pocket that the thief didn't take and turned the TV off, proving it was his. The manager then had to call and report this. Turns out accepting a TV without a remote is a red flag that he missed in this case. The manager quit, but the general belief was that he knew most of the stuff he was selling was stolen, but he fudged paperwork to keep the thief's identity a secret. My dad put him in his place and humiliated him in the most simple way for being a lying prick. My friend's dad works at a pawn shop in a crappy area and has had some crazy stuff come in, mostly stolen weapons and tools, but the story he likes to tell is when a homeless guy tried to sell a sawn-off shotty covered in tape. They called the cops and the guy tells him he found it in the park. A block away from my high school was a pawn shop. It was announced that everyone in the entire school was going to get a Chromebook to do some schoolwork. On the first day that we got the Chromebooks, it was rumored that multiple people had brought them to the pawn shop to make a quick buck. I asked my teachers who was in charge of all the Chromebook repairs about this later, and he said that only one student had actually done it that he knew of, and he used the money to buy green herb. When my first fiancée and I parted ways, I went to go sell my ring. She'd given me her ring back, so I went to pawn them because I was broke and I got so many dirty looks for selling an engagement ring. I think they thought I stole it despite what I told them, but them's the breaks, I suppose. One of the guys who worked at the place told me that someone brought in an F-box, a decent-sized box that has a switch on it that turns on a motor inside that has a connection to a toy that thrusts in and out of a hole. I saw a guy in my local store bring in about 3 automatic weapons with the ammo and about 10 grenades, ready to use. Not sure if it was illegal or not, but it made my antique Hot Wheels collection look like crap. I work in a store. Not really illegal in itself, but probably the most contact with law enforcement that I've had. I live in the UK where we have to put the serial number of any technology through a police check before paying the customer. We put it in and it flagged as wanted by the police. Within 10 minutes the police were there and asking us to hand the phone over and talk to the guy. We hadn't even gotten through to them yet on the phone. From what I understand, the guy brought it online a few months back. Unfortunately for him, the phone was wanted in connection with a murder. The look on that poor guy's face. That is a really unlucky eBay case that my dude there got himself. Don't you hate it when you try to be thrifty and end up being taken down to the station for an intense questioning and then they keep your damn phone? My house was broken into years back. They stole very particular items. My mum's laptop, which was hidden under the couch, our great-grandmother's jewelry and such. My laptop, Wacom pen tablet, and iPad were all sitting on the kitchen table, and the only thing they took was my iPad and the pen to my Wacom tablet. They left my laptop and the tablet itself. Remember these points for later. The cops couldn't find any good prints to run through the database, and no one was immediately found as a suspect. Fast forward a few months, my brother manages one of the biggest pawn shops in our city, and he called me to tell me that some guy just tried to pawn my iPad. The guy handed the iPad to my brother turned it on and the home screen is set to a picture of me and my nephew. Brother tells the guy that he has to take it to the back and check the serial numbers after getting the guy's driver's license. Brother calls the cops and then comes back out to tell the guy that he has to keep the iPad because it's stolen property. The guy books it out of there, but he wasn't very bright. My brother has all of his personal information. The cops did an investigation and come to find out this guy is the head of a large substance and theft ring. His cronies steal things and they have to give him the stolen goods, and then he gives them the substances. Well, a few more months go by and we found out that our mum's best friend's boyfriend was the guy who put the hit on our house. He had an oxy problem due to a bad back surgery and a substance-dealing doctor. When the doc cut the supply, he turned to other means. It wasn't him that broke in or stole our stuff, however. He just knew that I used my computer for my job and made sure they left my laptop and stole my mum's. He and his boss, along with multiple other addicts and career thieves, were brought down by my iPad. The cops said they'd broken into an estimated 300-plus homes and had stolen millions of dollars in property. I work in one, and honestly, you just never know what's going to come through that door. Former employee. The most illegal thing brought to my shop was an 8-ball of white snow. He wasn't selling it but wanted to buy a digital scale, and he brought the ball along just to test the scales we had. Aside from that, a chainsaw. Although not illegal in itself, they used it to threaten me, which was pretty illegal. Pawn shops in a big metro get pretty crazy. I had this street rat named Tintin bring in a purse with fresh bloodstains on it. I used to work in a pawn shop that was just for tools. This guy brought in these really nice top-of-the-line wrenches to sell. He said business was booming, and I asked what he did, and he said, "You really want to know?" In a scared kind of way. I was like, "Yeah, I'm just making small talk," and he said he was a substance dealer. So I said I don't want the wrenches, they were probably stolen. I used to work in an electronics or DVDs games secondhand store, and we used to get people in all the time selling what were blatantly mass-run bootlegs. Hundreds of copies of the same DVD, which under even rudimentary inspection didn't come off a proper print run. Heck, if you popped one in a player, it usually just cut right into the movie a few seconds in or something like that. That and people who had just stolen crap from a first-hand retailer nearby and were busy tearing the packaging off in the damn queue for the registers. One of my friends in high school somehow managed to steal several laptops from cash converters. Got away with it too. That was until they tried to sell one of the laptops they stole back to cash converters the very next week, with the CC sticker and barcode still on the bottom. He was quickly caught and they found his whole stash, and he did 100 hours of community service. What is the funniest answer to a test when the student clearly didn't know the answer? I graded AP exams this summer. For one essay question, I got an awesome barbecue sauce recipe from a kid in Tennessee. I've made that a couple of times, and it's excellent. I was marking a final year engineering test. I'm a teacher's assistant, not a lecturer. And instead of answering the last question, some guy drew an incredibly detailed portrait of himself serving fries at McDonald's with the caption, "Me if I fail this test." I still had to fail him, but I did feel bad about it. Some say he's serving fries to this day. It wasn't for a test, but a large portion of the class didn't do an assignment, so the teacher decided to assign a makeup assignment. He wasn't planning on assigning anything, so he asked the class for ideas. Someone said, "An essay about procrastination," and he said, "I like that idea," and the conversation ended with that. Next class rolls around and someone turns in an essay titled, "The Importance of Effective Communication," because he never actually assigned the essay. It was a pass or fail class, so the essay was pretty much a completion grade. The teacher accepted it and gave him a warning that if he tried that in any other class, he might have gotten a 0. I was helping a teacher grade back in high school, and I was grading a kid's geometry quiz. The question was a 2-column proof, and it asked to prove that one side was congruent to another, based off 2 triangles being congruent. Had to prove that the 2 triangles were congruent first. This was his whole answer. Triangle ABC is congruent to triangle BCD because they kinda look the same. Side AB equals side DB because they're both 3 eraser lengths long. College-level physics exam asked for a brief description of Maxwell's theory. The instructor shamed a student by reading aloud his answer. Good to the last drop. Just another student. We had a test which involved life skills. The question was, what are 2 causes of infertility in males? His response was lack of a wang. He tried to argue that he wasn't wrong and somehow got a mark. I don't know if the teacher survived that debate with a straight face, but I know for a fact that I wouldn't have been able to. Sorry students, this is what happens when you go for the low-hanging fruit. No pun intended. My friend needed to name Alga Hiss on his government exam. He forgot the dude's name, so he put "I am not a spy." Back in college, if I vaguely knew the word I needed to answer, like Alga Hiss, I'd write out the A very clearly and then scribble next to it so it looked like I knew the answer and just had crappy handwriting. It worked extremely well. As a teacher's assistant in my high school grading chemistry tests, for one question, which read, "Convert 1 meter into millimeters," one student had converted meters to yards to feet to inches to centimeters to millimeters. rather than just multiply by 1,000. My high school teacher would always encourage us to write funny answers down if we didn't know anything. She found marking tests extremely boring, so if we could make her laugh, we'd at least get 0.5 of a mark on it. The student actually knew the answer, he just didn't know how to spell it. I taught history and showed a video clip of Ronald Reagan's famous, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." In a later quiz, I asked students to write down this quote, with my favorite response starting, "Mr. Gooberchuck." I had one ESL student who couldn't quite get the hang of changing singular nouns into plurals. "I have a pen" got him full marks on the unit test. "I have 2 pen" and added an IS at the end of the word pen didn't get him full marks. I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that Double Sausage Dude just has really crappy grammar. It wasn't an answer, it was a proposition. Saw a post on Reddit where someone drew a picture and got credit for it for a test answer. So I did the same thing on my next science test. Teach told me that my drawing of a giraffe was garbage and gave me nothing. I was a student teaching first grade and was quizzing a student on sight words. The word was horse, and he said, "Horse, horse, horse!" I'm a teacher that hasn't got any super funny answers yet, but when I was a student, my philosophy class did a group thing about a test. Our professor had told us that at the start of the quarter, that when we did the final, if every single person turned in the test that's blank except for a name, we'd all get an A. Apparently, he made this offer to every class for years. Well, of the 20 or so of us in the class, only one person was going to pass. We all thought the teacher was a jerk. So when it came time for the final, he passed out the test and left to go to his office. After he was gone, we all talked about it, and those of us who had bad grades said, "We have nothing to lose by turning in a blank paper. We're failing anyway." And then we looked at the one guy who was passing. He said, "I'm a philosophy major, so I just want to find out if he means it or not. Let's do it." So we all wrote down our names on our individual tests. Then we lined up and went to his office and one by one handed him our blank tests. He was shocked. We were the first class to pull it off. He made us promise not to tell anyone, and he did give us all 100% on the final. I clearly didn't keep my promise about not talking about it. One time, a kid in my Latin class started sneezing out various denominations of bills when turning in his test. The total added up to $75. I think he dropped the class. When my wife and I were TAs in grad school, we proctored and then graded an essay exam. We had a student write, "I don't know, so here's a picture of a puppy," and he then drew a beautiful picture of a puppy. It took him nearly an hour to complete it. To this day, when I ask my wife a question, and she doesn't know the answer, she just says, "puppy." Well, I'm not a grader, but I've got one. An old teacher of mine used to grade AP stats tests, and he said a student once drew an elaborate Rube Goldberg chain reaction kind of thing across 2 pages for a short answer. Not me, but a classmate of mine. In my 8th grade social studies class, the teacher offhandedly mentioned, "Necessity is the mother of invention." On the test, one question was, "Blank is the mother of blank." My classmate wrote, "Mary is the mother of Jesus," and we were all really upset that he didn't get the credit. 8th grade free response question, explain how the United States acquired the Louisiana Purchase. My answer? The United States purchased Louisiana. I received full credit. Well, to be fair to you, it was a stupidly worded question. What else were you going to say? Napoleon was like, "Oh my god, we need those dollar bills." And then Jefferson was like, "But seriously, it's not in the Constitution that I can buy stuff like that." And then Jefferson's cabinet was like, "Stop being a jerk and buy it." And then Jefferson was like, "K." I mean, your teacher just wrote the worst question ever. I had a friend who put "Obama is a lizard" as an answer to all of the AP Gov-free response questions. The narrator feels like, given what he's learned about certain parts of the US, you might be able to get a partial credit on that answer depending on which deep red state you did that in. Got to teach a technical theatre class and gave a quiz at the beginning to see what the kids knew. One of the questions was, "Name a good conductor." I was looking for metal conductor like copper or brass, ended up with several answers like Leopold Stokowski, Leonard Bernstein, and several famous composers. We all had a good laugh when we went over the answers. A bit different, not quite a test. Class was reading a play in English literature during junior year. We were rotating parts between students through the various acts, point being that we did actually have parts, so people weren't necessarily focusing on the story as much as they were on when it was going to be their turn to speak. Some girl's line comes up and her character is mentally handicapped. The line read, "Make horse sounds," with horse being spelt H-O-A-R-S-E, as in raspy throat. The student started to neigh. I don't know about credit, but we all had a good laugh. On a sample essay I read for AP World History, they were listing evidence for a question related to American Indians. One kid wiped his blood on the exam sheet and wrote, "This is a blood sacrifice to the sun god of the Incas." Sadly, he didn't get the credit. I took a philosophy class in high school. For the final paper, we had the option to write an essay arguing to the teacher that we were not a figment of his imagination. I decided to do the opposite. I wrote a whole essay about how I was a figment of my teacher's imagination, and I ended up with a B in the course. That was the only assignment I handed in for the entire course. When I was a sophomore in high school, I was in a biology class, and the very first test I was clueless. At this point in time, I didn't quite know the teacher or his style or anything about him, really. So naturally, clueless on the essay question, I decided to go meta and write a speech about how I was bombing the test. I compared it to Harry Truman deciding to nuke Japan, and how that was thought to have saved lives. By my own nuking of the test, who knows, maybe I could do the same. I got a call from my mum later on. He didn't like it. In fact, he decided to interpret it as a bomb threat. Needless to say, that was a rough semester afterwards. I was one of the last classes to take a hotly contested, statewide standardized exam. In its dying days, some big muckety-muck decided it would be a great idea to add a science portion to the exam. Their mistake was telling my class that we were the first class to take it, and therefore were simply testing if it was useful for the school board, and our results on that section would have no bearing on our final test results. The question was something like, Susie and John have a heavy box. They need to put the heavy box on a shelf, but it's too heavy. They have several pieces of wood, a saw, a pulley, etc., etc. Design a system for moving a box to the shelf and explain why this works in scientific terms. My response? Susie and John could do many things. They could build a lever, as you're obviously suggesting they do with the boards, but the box would likely slide back down the lever and kill Susie and John. Here is a drawing of Susie and John dead under a box. They could build a pulley, but I don't want to explain how that works, and also, if they're too small to reach the shelf with the box, how the frick are they going to attach a pulley to the roof? Drawing of Susie and John looking sad as their parents yell at them for screwing around with the garage ceiling. My recommendation is that Susie and John open the fricking box and move everything individually like normal human beings. Picture of Susie and John high-fiving and saying, "Gee, Willy Walkers, we did it!" Since the test was unscored, I never found out how they liked my solution, but I do hope I gave some old ladies a few conniption fits. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Not exactly an answer to the prompt, but at my high school, thanks to a friend, we now have the AP Stats Challenge. Get 5 on the test while writing the entire free response portion in haikus, and only haikus. So I think 5 to 10 people have pulled it off, and it definitely made the test a lot more entertaining for me. Not a teacher, but in AP Physics 2 on a practice test, so naturally I didn't care as much. When asked to solve for the mass defect, I explained how mass effect drives work in great detail, as well as different uses. I think my teacher liked it because he wrote, "This is my favorite store on the Citadel," instead of marking it wrong. Not a grader, but on the AP exam for world history, a friend of mine, rather than actually write an essay on one of the assigned topics, described the plot of Mulan. That's my second favorite story involving her. Purposefully easy extra credit question asked, "Who's your favorite founding father and why is it Alexander Hamilton?" I responded with Aaron Burr, and drew a short stick figure montage of their famous duel. I knew the answer, but decided to be flippant regardless. I still got full points. Once on an endocrinology exam I was sitting, the last question required everyone to reference 5 RCTs published in a journal in APA format. No one had been told that anything like this would be on their exam, and obviously no one was going to remember all the authors of a study off the top of their heads. So being my frustrated self, I referenced How to Be an Absolute B-Word by lecturer's name. 2 weeks later, I got called into her office and was made to apologize and told to not do this again. I love the sass on display here. Also, is the teacher's ego so fragile that they wanted to officially reprimand a student for writing an answer in a private setting that only the grader would see? I get that it's disrespectful, but honestly, who is so butthurt by that they go to the hassle of arranging a formal disciplining session? I am the student in this case. I'm taking AP Calculus and it's absolutely kicking my butt. When I didn't know an answer, I wrote a prayer to the god of math. O Lord of math, grant me thy favor, that I may understand this thy holy work, for I am yet powerless before your tests, and weak in my calculations. Amen. I got a half credit. On my AP Calc test last year, there was one question that I had no idea what the frick they were even asking. After staring at it for about 10 minutes, I gave up and drew a portrait of the proctor surrounded by velociraptors and climbing up a rope from a helicopter. I like to think I got at least partial credit for that. I was taking a film history and appreciation class at college and came across this question. What is camera obscura? My answer was, the type of camera a hipster uses. I got no points, but my professor said he got a good laugh out of it. Biochemistry exam. There was a complicated synthesis question. How would you produce X? And the student answered, with blood magic. The answer was written in his blood. I asked about it later. The student had gotten a paper cut when taking the test, apparently. Test included reading a map of Rome and finding your way around using coordinates. Question: how can you get to the Colosseum from the starting point? Plot out a route on the grid provided. My answer: I don't need the grid because I've played Assassin's Creed Brotherhood enough to know where I'm going. Question: who was Genghis Khan? Answer: the host of The Price is Right from about 300 AD to 350 AD. Back in the 3rd grade, I had a 2-part written question on a science test. Part 1. If you had to change the gas nitrogen to a liquid, how would you do it? My answer: I would change it to a liquid. Part 2. Explain what would happen. My answer: it would change to a liquid. Funny thing is, I actually got full credit. My teacher wrote something like, I can't say that this is what I was looking for, but I can't say that it's wrong either. Not a teacher, but when I was in high school, I had an essay exam about a book I hadn't read. Instead of answering the question, I wrote an essay about why I didn't read the book and talked about another book I'd read instead. My teacher ended up liking it and gave me a good grade, even though I hadn't read the book he assigned. I guess he liked that I put effort into writing an essay about a book I'd actually read instead of trying to bullcrap him. Question: what is X? Answer: it's certainly not Y. Question: state the differential and integral form of Hooke's law. Answer: the differential and integral form of Hooke's law. I got a full credit on each of these masterpieces. I had to read Heart of Darkness in high school. I literally couldn't get more than 3 pages into it. We had to write an essay in class about it, so I pretty much wrote, there's a man on a boat, and he's recounting a tale that took place in Africa. I make it 3 pages in and realize that I haven't actually comprehended more than the first paragraph. So I start over, there's a man on a boat, and just repeated that for a page. Then we had to read our essays aloud, and luckily we were in the AP class, so the teacher let us get away with crap. Also, had to do the same thing with All the King's Men, and I wrote about the repulsive writing style. There's a car on a road, and it's driving down the road, and it's about to go off the road. And there's an N-word in the field by the road. But the N-word doesn't see the car, and the car doesn't see him, and it's about to go off the road. But they don't see each other. This is a terrible book. The narrator hasn't read All the King's Men and is not sure that this succinct summary will be enough to sway them over to doing so. Let him know in the comments if it's worth picking up. On a quiz in Bio 2, it asked what group a certain organism was in. I didn't know, so I put Blue Man Group. My TA apparently liked it because I got the point anyway. When I was in American history in high school, I had a test where one of the questions was asking what the 19th Amendment was. It was the women's right to vote, by the way. My teacher was male, and I was just screwing around and thought I'd try to make him laugh. So for the answer, I put a mistake. Ended up getting 100% on that test. I got one from both sides of the spectrum. Once in advanced calculus, the final question was something which I had no clue how to answer. So I just wrote in the entire space, 7. It turned out 7 was the correct answer. However, I got no credit for it for not showing any working. And when I was a marker at university, I was going through the tests and a question was accounting. Describe a transaction which causes a decrease in an asset and also equity. A student's answer was, a building caught on fire and got destroyed. Technically, he was correct, although it wasn't really a transaction, more of an event. Question: what are your opinions on doing the deed before marriage? 16 marks. Answer: I wouldn't buy a car before test driving it. How are you even graded on this? It's asking your opinion. Even not answering could be taken as meaning you're indifferent. In 12th grade, me and a buddy of mine, let's call him Tom, were both in the same calculus and vectors class. I already decided to major in history at a university, so my mark in this class didn't mean too much to me. Anyways, during the exam, I got to a question which asked me to graph the derivative of a given function. Not knowing what it was, I simply drew a kitty face on the graph, cause screw it, and moved on. About 10 minutes later, Tom, who was sitting beside me, discreetly got my attention and I see he's stuck on that same problem, and hoping I'll help him out. Chuckling to myself, I turned to the question on my exam and moved it over slightly. Seeing what I'd done, Tom shook his head, quietly whispered, "Screw it," and did the same thing. Suffice to say, our teacher was less than happy with us after the exam. In high school, I was in biology class with a buddy of mine. The class and the teacher were a complete joke and no one took it seriously. On an exam, the teacher wanted an essay on something, and my buddy didn't feel like writing it. Instead, he drew a picture of Jesus and wrote, "Jesus is always the answer" above it. He received full credit. If my English teacher is on Reddit and sees this, she'll probably use my answer. We had a Scarlet Letter quiz and had to connect the term antimonian to the novel. I got it in my head that Antimony was a woman in a Greek myth who was punished for adultery like Hester. I was the student. Spelling test. Asked to spell euthanasia. My answer was youth in Asia, the 3 words jammed together. On my English 1 last year, on one essay I wrote the names of 150 NFL football players. I got a 4. University. I dropped Chem 2 lecture, but still had to take the corresponding lab because of drop limits. Didn't get most of the material, but didn't particularly care if I failed because it was only 1 credit anyway. I drew Pokemon for all the answers on the final. I got an A. The professor was a cool guy. On the last day of class, someone brought in a big flan, another girl brought a guitar, we had a mini party, and the professor played the guitar for us. What is the most unethical thing you've been asked to do at work? I worked at a well-known automotive garage chain. I quit on my second day on the job because while I was doing an oil change, my manager told me to take out the customer's air filter, rub it on the ground outside and show it to the customer so they believe it needs to be changed. As a customer, I changed an air filter myself an hour before I took it in for an oil change, and I was suggested to replace it because it was dirty. I showed them the receipt, and they said, "Well, the entire system makes it dirty, you see." I was asked to ignore 15 open 50-gallon drums that were filled with used phosphoric acid sitting out back of a workshop next to a stream. In the middle of a city, heavy rains and hurricane winds tipped a few over one night. The boss dumped one out on the ground because he needed the drum. When I quit, I called the city on their butts. I used to work in event management and was asked to ignore fire safety violations on a regular basis. One time we hosted a funeral for a sort of local celebrity with about 3,500 people in attendance, at a venue that was licensed for 300. It was frighteningly obvious that any sort of mass panic would be absolutely disastrous, so the 2 staff members decided to go behind management's back and call the police. Another time, the boss at a venue refused to repair a broken heater in the middle of winter, with outside temperatures being well below freezing. He told the staff to simply use the gas oven to heat. CO poisoning is a big risk, especially since this is an industrial-strength oven meant for professional catering we're talking about. Where I am, it's illegal to operate an oven like that without a suitable ventilation system in place, which would have needed to be turned off in order to heat the place up. I'm in IT. I was asked by an executive to delete very incriminating emails he had sent to an innocent receptionist from our Exchange server. He thought they were private and she was talking about suing. He sent this request over email. I sent it to our HR and investigative units. Anytime there's a firefight or shooting incident in a war zone, afterwards you routinely have to fill out sworn statements as to how the events went down, who shot whom, etc. Let's just say there's a lot of top-down pressure and coaching beforehand, and nobody fills those out truthfully. That's simultaneously shocking and not surprising at all. That's how armies maintain the appearance that they're the good guys in any given engagement, maintain the appearance of competence to their superiors, and try to sweep friendly fire cases like Pat Tillman under the rug. Pretty shifty. I worked graveyard shift at a gas station. The owner came in under the influence one night and we were chatting. We talked about benign things and I mentioned that I just found out I was pregnant. The first thing he said was, "Good, then I wouldn't have to use protection." I was so taken back that I didn't say anything. He went on to ask me if I had tattoos in any place that he couldn't see. Then he commented on my necklace. It had tiny handcuffs on it. He asked if that's how I liked it, handcuffed. After all that and me refusing his requests politely, he said, "How much money do I have to get out of the ATM to have you tonight?" My response was he'd better go home to his wife and kids before I called them to let them know where he was. He threatened to fire me. The next day, my manager pulls me aside and asks what happened. Then he asked if I would just keep it to myself. I told him he would if he'd take me off graveyard shifts. That's how I got to keep my job and work better hours. I could make a list, but we'd be here a while. I used to work in a senior home which claimed to be independent living for the extraordinarily wealthy kind of old people. And let me tell you, that place was a prison. Kitchen was regularly below health standards and the place was a gosh darn rip-off for our residents. Our boss's stepmom moved in and was unable to move, and liability-wise we weren't able to help her with anything. However, boss would make an exception calling it above and beyond care. Screw that, if she fell we all knew our butts were on the line. Also, illegal petty cash boxes and hundreds of off-the-book expenses for the boss. My buddy used to keep the books there and he actually gave up on asking how much he was doing that was illegal. Be very careful about what senior homes you send your loved ones to, people. Not me personally, however, I was an assistant manager of a sports bar a few months ago. The owner's son and general manager of my store allowed an 18-year-old to serve booze. 19 is the minimum in my state, and she failed to card and served an underage person who got in a wreck. That person's car was totaled and she sustained severe injuries but lived. The owner's son called the other girl who was working on that shift, who was of legal age, and told her verbatim, "I want you to go home and practice saying in the mirror, 'I was your server and I carded you.'" She thought she had no option but to go along with it, and I had to be the one to tell the server what her boss was asking to do was commit perjury, and that if she did it, she'd go to jail, have a record, and wouldn't be able to so much as get a job at Walmart when she got out. Screw that guy for trying to ruin another person's life because he made a horrible mistake. The manager wanted me to clean the bathrooms, but he was being kinda weird, so I said no. Turns out a homeless person had smeared crap and blood all over the walls. I told him later he was required to get a hazmat team to take care of that. I'm not risking getting any number of diseases. He just got some other rube to do it. Similar thing happened to my friend at Macca's, except I'm pretty sure it wasn't a homeless person. She was only 14 and the manager refused to even give her gloves. Another older employee threatened to get him fired if he tried to make anyone else clean the bathroom without following procedure. He backed down, but the woman got him fired anyway because he was a power-hungry craphead who liked to use his position to get the younger employees to do questionable stuff. The amount of factory managers that want the light curtains, area scanners, and other safety features disabled on their machines in the name of speeding up production is pretty appalling. That crap's there for a reason, and if I disable it, my butt is on the line if or when your employee gets killed. I work in documentary production, and part of my job is to do annotated scripts for big international networks. I'm sure a lot of people here watch them. This is where you'll have to give references for every single line in your script to prove to the network that what you've written is 100% factual. There was a line written by the scriptwriter and director that was not quite factual due to the way it was worded. I suggested the line be reworded, but he was adamant to have it that way. So of course the network came back to us and said either change the line or find a more concrete source. I searched and couldn't find a source backing it up because of course the line wasn't factual. The director asked me to make nice with one of the experts in the topic and have him sign off on the line as a fact. I refused to do it, but the director went ahead and did it himself, and the line made it into the final film. I get very frustrated every time I see the film on TV and hear the line. When I worked in manufacturing, I would get sent into places inside running machinery because I was small and had small hands. Many of those spots were also for confined space trained people, which I was not. If you hesitated, they would scream at you from behind, which is super helpful in a confined space when you're trying not to lose your fingers in a belt. Oh, and I made $8 an hour with no benefits. No wonder they sent all those jobs to China. This was early 2000s in Wisconsin. I was a temp making pots and pans on the third shift. My boss was useless and a butthole. He ended up getting demoted to a regular worker, but was too lazy to keep up, so he was fired eventually. I did keep all my fingers, but I almost lost my scalp once. My hair got caught under a running belt. Luckily, I thought fast and grabbed my ponytail and let it take a chunk of hair instead of the whole thing. It was crappy, but I've since learned that you shouldn't do something just because someone in authority tells you to. Thank goodness that the author specified they worked in the 2000s in Wisconsin, because otherwise the narrator would have assumed from this story that they were working in a Victorian mill in old London, back when sending people into moving machinery blades was the norm. I got told to cut an employee's hours so he dropped to part-time status. That way, the company, more accurately that store in particular, wouldn't have to pay the cost of his insurance. He had recently just got back from having major colon surgery and was deemed a risk. The worst part was I needed this guy to work full-time in department, and I had a whole team of people itching to take vacation since we worked the holidays short-handed. Anyways, joke was on the company. Immediately after I was told to do this, I reached out to a rival company and jumped ship within 2 to 3 weeks. They ended up having to give surgery guy hours once I left. I haven't personally been asked to do anything illegal, but I work at a workers' comp insurance company. The amount of employers who won't report employee injuries is staggering. I've had family members call, sobbing and begging for us to pay medical bills for injuries that occurred at work, but they can't report the claim, so there's nothing we can do. We have employers who tell their employees that it's too late to report, and they think they're just crap out of luck. Guys, if you ever get injured at work, it has to be reported. There's no such thing as too late. Your claim needs to be reported. I used to work in construction as a fire protection services inspector. I'd say I was asked to ignore something dangerous about 1 out of every 3 sites. They also thought nothing of asking me to ignore it like someone else has before. I'm talking about things like an entire sprinkler system not actually being connected in a brand new building, or fire exits that don't exist. How about alarm systems that evacuate the wrong floor when smoke is detected? Apparently, I was a B-word for refusing to issue a fire safety certificate until errors like this were fixed, things that usually take about an hour to fix, which I was happy to wait and watch them do. I was asked to sleep with the health inspector to get us a pass. Cheap motel. A lot of sketchy things, including but not limited to working girls, gambling, bending of the liquor license. All these went on there, but I worked the front desk and was told, "If any ethnic people want a room, tell them we're full." I did not comply, and 1 or 2 times I was confronted and I just said, I didn't notice they were ethnic. I lasted 6 months there. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Years ago, I was working at a local pharmacy. The owner had always seemed like a revenue above all else kind of guy, often ranting at us pharmacy technicians about not making enough money. One day we had a patient come in with a prescription for an expensive medicine. So I tried to fill the prescription, but I noticed that our inventory for this rarely filled medicine was expired. I was filling out forms for new inventory when the owner saw what I was doing and told me to fill the prescription with the expired stuff. I tried to explain, but he silenced me with a glare. I looked to my co-workers for support, but they averted their glances. I ended up filling the prescription, but to this day I feel ashamed for not taking a stand against it. I quit the job a week later. I got asked to lie to customers, repeatedly, although this was a sales role, so it was more or less par for the course. If we worked over 40 hours, we wouldn't get time and a half, But we would get that money in an envelope in cash with no taxes taken out, so it sort of worked out. That's not legal. We would get a lot of stray cat dumps, and as you can imagine, it's very costly, but we did it anyway because you can't run an animal hospital and not love animals. Cats don't have Amex cards. Some strays were not very adoptable. We had a senior cat on a lot of meds that suffered seizures, and a weirdo wire-haired chihuahua that took a very long time to warm up to people. She bit, but had no teeth. And a house cat that had feline transmissible diseases. We had them for years. The pets, not the disease. The owner was bought out by a corporation. The first thing the corp wanted to do was bring all of the strays, even the residents, to the Humane Society. We fricking rioted. It took them a year to get them out one by one without causing too much upset, but I tell you this, none of them went to a shelter. I worked at a medical practice and the doctor would just throw medical waste and bags of used needles in the dumpster out back, instead of properly disposing of it. I still don't understand why. He could have lost his license and got slapped with thousands of dollars in fines. Just goes to show, even if you graduated from Columbia Medical School, you can still be a total fricking idiot. Not me, but my dad was asked to commit fraud in order to keep the company he was working for afloat. Ended up doing it and accumulating $16 million in fraud over the course of more than 10 years. And yes, he was jailed. He cooperated with the feds though, so he got less time. It would suck if I blew that secret on the internet. Folks, if a high-ranking boss ever asks you to do this, get them to sign an order or send an email detailing what they'd like you to do, and then immediately take it into the IRS or the equivalent. They're willing to get you sent to jail to keep their business afloat, so return the favor. I worked for a packaging company that made the pop-top caps for bottled water. They asked me to investigate altering the design of their caps so that it couldn't be reused. The idea or scheme was that if they invented a pop cap that would pop up but not back down again, they could market it to the bottled water companies as something that would force people to drink their product in a single sitting, and therefore be more likely to purchase another one later in the day, and prevent people from refilling the bottle from the tap because the lid would never close again. It was only half-heartedly thrown out there at a meeting, but everyone looked a bit uncomfortable about it and luckily it wasn't pursued. Which is just as well because as someone who thinks that bottled water is a rip-off and bottled water companies are wasting crap loads of plastic, I would not have been happy about working on that project. Working at a bar and restaurant, yeah, just cut the mold off those strawberries. Do it quick, we need them for the daiquiris. Followed sometime later by, you're cutting too much off. I was asked not to hire black people or out-of-shape people. Safe to say, I quit not long after that. Perform tasks I wasn't authorized for at all. I'm CNA and I can't tell you how many times a family member of a patient has demanded that we do the nurse's work or the physical therapist's work. Some of it I knew how to do in basic, but if I would have gotten it wrong and hurt my patient, it would have been on me. I was asked to blame a client team member for a mistake I made as there was a financial implication to my company if it was one of our team members who was at fault. I didn't consider doing that once though. I went above the person who asked me and told him it was my fault and I think it actually worked out to my benefit long term. As a manager, I was asked to tell my 16-year-old coworker that he wasn't allowed to drink water while he was working the fryer in the summer because a customer saw him taking a sip and said it, quote, upset her. Yeah, safe to say I didn't repeat that order. Someone asked me to remove the password from their deceased daughter's laptop so they could see if there were any pictures on it. Apparently the daughter had tried to rescue her boyfriend who'd been dragged out to sea. Neither could swim and both drowned. I'm my own boss, so nobody made me, but boy was it an ethical conundrum. I've been in similar situations. What I do is unlock it privately, make sure there's nothing overtly damaging to their memory, like racy pictures or documents on how to kill people, and then give it back to them. It means so much to someone who lost someone they love to get pictures back. Plus you can do someone who's gone a solid and protect their memory. That's really awesome of you. My best friend, who often watches these videos, hi Jay, has been instructed to completely destroy my phone and delete a specific folder on my computer. I'm not a bad person, but there's a lot of old conversations or journal writings or photos that I like to have for myself, but I would never want my daughter to find them. Huh. I was asked to schedule my bathroom breaks as I was going to the bathroom too many times during the day. When I was asked to write advertising copy for homeopathic children's medicines. Oh, and fluoride-free toothpaste. which does jack all to protect teeth. Background: busy fast food restaurant right at the end of the lunch rush. There was some bread sitting on the counter, and my manager asked me to put it in the cabinet where it went. As I was putting it away, a customer came up to me and said, "Excuse me, but that bread was on the floor, and someone picked it up and set it on the counter." I apologized and moved it back out of the cabinet, and asked my manager about it, just in case the customer was confused or something else. Her response: "Oh, just wait for the customer to leave and put it away once they're gone." Nope. I'm sure there have been worse things, but I recently left my job as a barista. There were a handful of times when we dealt with an offensive customer and I was asked by another barista to decaf their drink. I never did. The thought offended me even more because I take a lot of pride from my work ethic. Besides, I didn't want to lower myself to how a customer treats us, and it's not like I knew what they'd been going through either. Well done to you, you're a much more considerate and honorable person than the narrator. Personally, whenever I had customers like this, the only thing stopping me from pulling crap like decaffing their coffee was the fact that everyone could see what I was doing, and I'm too much of a coward to risk getting caught. The malice to screw with someone's orders I totally possess. In short, I had to sell booze to a drunk man with a bad ID, and I quit. I was working at a part-time job at a local gas station chain a few months back to make some extra cash. Near the end of my shift on my third day, I had a very drunk man come up to the counter to buy 2 large cases of beer. I asked him for his ID and it was shredded, taped back together and outdated. He kept insisting he was a regular and it would be fine. I asked my trainee manager for help and she actually made me sell booze to this guy. I tried to protest, but she told me it would cost me my job if I didn't. I admit I made the sale, but I immediately went on break and called the GM and the person above them, and they refused to do anything. So I finished the remaining hour and quit. I've been asked to cook chickens that didn't smell too good. You know those recycle bins at supermarkets? The glass ones get rather dangerous when you're transporting usually 20 to 30 pounds of sharp, broken glass to the back of the truck to go to a plant. My former bosses expected me to do that myself in pouring rain or snow, where I had to lift the container practically over my head to dump in this bigger container. All for minimum wage. Screw that. As a doctor in the ICU, I have to continue treating a patient who is clearly dying and has no chance of survival because family members who know nothing about medicine get to make the decision and they don't want the person to die. So a person with no chance of survival is subjected to all sorts of invasive procedures, medications that will end up having no effect, in addition to the CPR, which is quite a violent procedure and will not save them, but it will break their ribs, among other things. I view this futile medical treatment as unethical. If someone can't survive, why am I pretending to save them by going through these motions, which is doing nothing to help? We were loading a truck late one night when one of us noticed a girl lying in a nearby parking lot, having some kind of seizure. It was already late, the parking lot was empty, and there was nobody else around other than us to go render some assistance. She might have laid there for hours if none of us had offered to help. Nevertheless, our boss told us to mind our own business and finish loading the truck. I said to myself, I'm not going to just ignore someone who could be dying, so I started towards the parking lot. But my boss began insisting that I was on his time and that I would do what he told me to do. I told him to take me off his time and continued over to the girl in the parking lot. It was a long time ago, and now that I remember, my boss did call 911 when we saw her lying there, so he wasn't exactly just going to leave her there. He just didn't want any of us going over and getting involved. We had a flood at a Ford dealership I worked at. The parts department was below ground and under about a foot of water. My boss asked me to gather older inventory that he couldn't send back and soak it down with a hose. His plan was to add it to the insurance claim. It was about $15,000. I refused as it was blatant insurance fraud. He didn't push it. What obvious signals did you have to give to your crush that flew right over their head? I was pursuing him hard. He was making me dinner at his house and we were chatting. He makes a joke about the hoops he'd have to jump through to get a classy woman like me to sleep with him. I respond with, "It wouldn't take all that for you to get me in your bed," as I flirtatiously grin at him and roll my eyes towards his bedroom. He laughs and responds with, "So, what do you like on your salad?" Thankfully, I didn't give up on that dork and now we're happily living together in the mountains. Hey, computer store guy. The best response to, "Hey, let me have your number so we can study at my place sometime," is not to roll your eyes and say, "Oh yeah, because you're so much smarter than me. I don't need help. I'm fine." Though watching your coworker silently lose his crap in the background was reward enough for that interaction. Look, I knew he liked me. I got in prime kissing position, as in my lips way too close to his to be mistaken for anything else, and he still did nothing. So I kissed him, he barely kissed me back, and when I pulled away and smiled at him, he said, "I'm confused," and genuinely looked like he didn't believe that what had just happened was real. We've been together 7 years now, 3 of which we've been married. He still has moments weekly where I see that same cute, disbelieving expression on his face, and he'll hug me and say, "Are you sure this is real? It's too good to be true." Many girls gave me attention in high school, so I figured that meant we were all good friends, and I never tried anything. Years later, I find out that I was basically on The Bachelor but held off on dating my friends for so long that they all figured I was gay or uninterested, so they moved on. But actually, I'm just dumb. Life sucks sometimes. Every time I read a girl's signals as being glaringly obvious, I always just end up having been led on by an overly flirtatious friend. It blows, so I don't blame you. I outright told him I liked him. He laughed and went, "Okay, where are the cameras?" I'm female, had a guy tell me straight out he liked me in high school. My response? You shouldn't joke about stuff like that, you could hurt someone's feelings. Had a girl in high school tell me she liked me. I thought it was a joke for about 3 weeks. Then I finally said okay and agreed to a date. Turns out, my instincts were right and it was just a joke that 6 or 7 girls got in on. Same thing happened to me, only except it was a prom date. Needless to say, it took a long time to figure out my current fiancé liked me. So we have some contention about whether outright telling someone that you're romantically interested in them is an actual signal. That's how crappy the playing field is out there for some people, I guess. At least I would assume that most of these seem to be younger people, so us crusty older people likely have it easier on that front. This was one that happened to me. I'm a girl, but I might as well share it anyway. There was this guy in my class in elementary school, and he told me he had a crush on a girl in our class, and if I could guess who, he'd tell me. I guessed every girl in my class, and he said no to them all, so I eventually just assumed he was messing with me and gave up. It took me 10 years to realize that I'd forgotten to guess myself. I sat on his lap, I put his arms around my waist, rested my head on his shoulder, and held onto his hands. He still had no idea that I liked him. Hold on a second. Holding hands and resting your head on his shoulders was a sign of interest? Frick! My high school crush did that to me whenever she had the opportunity to do so. She'd even rest her head on my lap a few times when we were alone. God damn it. I guess it was a little past crush at this point, but we were on a date and he asked me to be his girlfriend. I said, "Well, I don't even know what it's like to kiss you." And he goes, "Oh, okay." I was like, "That's your cue," and kissed him. It was kind of cute. I really can be an incredibly dumb guy about these sorts of things. Met her in the bar, lots of dancing together, drinks, her hand sitting on my thigh all the time as we sat. She asked me to walk her home, saying no one is home and she feels unsafe. I agree, in front of her home we stand there, she takes initiative and kisses me. I literally jump up because I was looking just past her face at this new Audi driving up the hill kinda half zoned out. I still feel so sorry for that girl. We hung out often. The last birthday of his was a hot day in July. I texted him, 95% of females who know better would be down for skinny dipping tonight. He responded, that activity sounds like it's lacking in morals. Me? Makes sense, I have few morals. Actual conversation between me and my now ex-boyfriend. I brought some new leopard skin undies. I can't wait for you to see them. I brought printer ink today. Dang it, story time from my perspective. Hindsight is 2020. At work with this girl, Kay. She comes to my house a lot. Spends time watching TV, joking around, snacking. I think just having fun together as friends because 1. I've never been in a relationship before, I was about 21 at the time, and 2. I was raised in a super conservative Christian home. Anyways, one day her best friend is hanging out with me and asking tons of questions about how I feel about Kay. You two are spending a lot of time together, are you gonna ask her out? Of course I respond with, how we're just friends, she shouldn't worry about it, blah blah. I'm so bad at hints, it's painful. Fast forward a week or so, Kay is over at my house super late and decides she isn't going home. She'll just sleep at my place. I insisted on sleeping on the couch. She was having none of it. I find a compromise and sleep in pajamas for the first time in more than 10 years, and sleep under the blanket, but not the sheets, so we're not actually touching. She gets super cuddly, and I roll over and go to sleep. In short, girl tries to get busy with me, and I just assume she's too lazy to drive home. I don't remember exactly when I clicked as to what had been going on. I just thought about it one day way later, and my reaction was something along the lines of, "Damn, I was an idiot." She was a great girl, and by the time I realized, we'd grown apart long since with her moving away. I said, "I want to F you," and he said, "Thanks." Although another time I texted a guy I wanted to sit on his face, and 20 minutes later I was doing just that. You win some, you lose some, I guess. As a guy to whom this has been said, I actually responded with thanks too. At the spur of the moment, it was the first thing that came to mind that didn't sound like an outright rejection, but was an attempt to say, I take that as a compliment, but I do not reciprocate. Not my smoothest moment, but I thought it was slightly better than no thanks. Us guys aren't stupid, we're just scared of being hurt and tricked into embarrassment. And then sometimes just so gosh darn confused, because this girl is so fine that you just assume she's just being mates, even though you're picking up all the signs and ignoring them, and then finally having the balls to confront her about it, just as you find out she gave a down-under kiss to your best mate because she got bored of you. This may or may not have happened to me. I kissed my now boyfriend a year before we started dating. He thought I slipped. Like, oops, I accidentally sucked on your face. It doesn't mean anything though. He didn't know I liked him until I showed up at his basic training graduation. I attempted to low-key ask him to prom. Had to be cool about it, you know, nice and smooth. My phrasing was something along the lines of, maybe you and I should go to prom together. It'd be more fun than going alone. His response was just, yeah, maybe, before he walked away. I took this as a rejection and immediately ceased all my other genius attempts at flirting, such as hugging, touching his hair, letting him carry my bag to the bus. He just kinda did it. I never made him and it became a daily routine for us. And smiling at him and other such things. I thought I was so subtle, but almost everyone else knew. I found out years later that he honestly had been clueless, and the reason he had grown distant with me is he thought I didn't like him back. There is no hope for us human beings. Also, if anyone was wondering why the answers are so weighted towards the woman's perspective, it's because the original submission question was about how clueless men can be as to women hitting on them. Personally, I feel like I've met women who were as clueless as some of these guys, but there you go. Here's one from the perspective of the man being hit on. I have a feeling that if she were a Redditor, a friend of mine would be on here talking about me right now. I've known her for about 4 years. I've always had a crush on her, but when I brought it up a few years back, she gave me a lukewarm response. I never mentioned it again. Then last night, she got to talking about reaching that age where you want something comfortable to settle into. And she kept throwing hints about me. As much as I adore this girl and have wanted to date her for a long time, I didn't like the way she worded everything. It wasn't like, there's someone I like and I don't know how to tell them. It was more like, I want a relationship, but I don't want to date strangers. I guess that's why I spend time with you. You're comfortable. I like how comfortable we are together, but I also need passion. So I joked my way out of the awkwardness. I'm sure she thinks I didn't catch her hints. I did. I just want her to be interested in me because I'm special to her and she appreciates me. Not because I'm good enough and she doesn't feel like trying harder, you know? Lots of girls that were my friends that I thought were dropping hints turned out like this. I've had 4 friends say that, if we're still single when we're 30, I'll go out with you then. I'm sorry, but screw that. No better way to ruin a friendship. I like you, but not enough to settle down while I'm still as hot as I am. Maybe after I've screwed all your friends, is how I hear it. Found someone who wanted me from the start, and we've been married almost 7 years now. I said I really care about you. He said, cool. He didn't get it. I said, no, I really care about you, like more than I care about most people. He said, oh, yeah, I like you too. We're now happily married. I find myself wondering when he will figure that out too. I used to sneak out and throw rocks at his window at night to let him come out and talk to me. Also used to organize friends' nights for the sole purpose of seeing him. Was a complete shock to him apparently when my friend drunkenly told him he was so blind to my crush on him. We've been dating for 6 years now. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out Easy Mode, also linked below, and subscribe. It's easy to dismiss this as he was clueless, but there's one alternative explanation. He just doesn't believe you could possibly like him and that it's some kind of mean practical joke that you and your friends will laugh about later. He actually thought I was serious? Yeah, low self-esteem is a B word. And yeah, I should have said at least one alternative, but I think the assumption here is that the guy is, in fact, interested, but he's missing the signals and has reasons why he's not taking the initiative. I never believed it was done for laughs, I just thought I couldn't possibly be the subject of their attraction. Like, what? Help me? Do you need a psych evaluation? This isn't normal. Amen. Listen to your heart, the brain is a butthole. Well, we were both really tipsy. She sat on my lap and said, "I could never be with a guy like you, you're too nice." She was feeling my face and everything. I was confused, I had a rager, and was sad at the same time. Snapchats with a deep neckline. So much chest visible. Wait, what if I get a Snapchat from a girl about her tan lines and she only has a towel covering the bits they censor on TV? As a girl, that's pretty hardcore flirting. My fiancé had no idea I was hitting on him before we started dating. After spending a day together with our college club, we returned to the campus and I asked him if he was free anytime the next week to hang out. He just said, "No, I'm really busy," which he maintains to this day was true. Then a few weeks later, I tried to get him to hang out again and I pretended to send a mass text to see who was in town for spring break. It was my night off, so I hoped he would respond. The next day he texts me, "Here," and that was it. I was convinced he didn't like me, but several of my friends told me to just ask him out. When I finally worked up the courage, I was so nervous that I wasn't my usual happy or goofy self. I told him I needed to talk to him, and he thought he had made me angry. He had no idea I was interested until I asked him out, and he was really happy when I did. We've been together almost 5 years now. Back in high school, I was very close to this girl who was in my friend group. Me and her did everything together, like go to the movies without the others in the group, go on lunch dates. She'd sleep over, we were basically a couple. I say basically because we all did this, but I wasn't dating her, or even tried, because I really thought she wasn't into me. But I mean, this girl literally would tell me things like, "I'd be happy if you were my first time," and she actually got undressed in front of me one day. I was just an extremely dense kid who assumed she was like this with all guys. On a happier note, I did end up dating her once I got to college, and we're still together now. The poor girl was probably so frustrated with you by the time you got the hint. She must really like you to have put up with that. In my defense, she later told me that when she would occasionally talk about guys to me, it was to try and make me jealous. Of course I was jealous, but I thought I had no right in judging who a friend liked. Sometimes we ignore your super obvious hints because we aren't interested. Sometimes we also ignore your super obvious hints because we're afraid of accidentally mixing up the signals and coming off as a creep. A friend told me she had a crush on a girl but didn't know if she was straight or not and couldn't figure out how to raise the subject. I gave her some mostly joking suggestions. I was the girl. It went so far over my head that I actually got jealous of the mystery girl. She's my girlfriend now and is still laughing about the fact that I was jealous of myself. Well, this one is a bit fairer than most of the others. It's hard to work out if someone bats for your team if you've only seen them date the opposite one, or haven't seen them date at all. I can understand them testing the waters a bit first, plus you gave jokey answers. Can you blame her? I'm the guy whose head it went over. After my first real date ever, though at the time I wasn't sure if it was a date, when I was 19 at the movies, I took her home. I offered to walk her to her door like a sir. When we're up there, she tells me I didn't have to do that, and I reply with something like, "Well, sometimes I like to pull out the old-school, traditional moves." She turns away from the key in her door, takes a slight step towards me and says, "Well, do you know any more of those traditional moves?" I fricking bow, tip my fricking hat, and fricking say something corny like, "I had a lovely time tonight, madam." I didn't realize what I'd missed until I was halfway home and I scared the people besides me at the light because I was screaming at the top of my lungs and pounding the dashboard. Telling that story still makes me mad at myself all these years later. I mean, I just kissed him because he wasn't taking any hint. Take control. If he likes you, it's a sure winner. I was part of an investigation into infidelity. I can't really go into detail about it, but the gist is that Jane Doe was cheating on her husband in the military with some other guy, Steve, on base. Or she was trying to. Suffice to say, that guy wasn't too bright. I mean, I met the guy and Steve wasn't all there. Some say he knew and was trying to dissuade her. knowing she was married, but due to some other stuff I can't divulge, he probably just didn't have a freaking clue. Sweet guy, good man, but dumb. Jane was really trying to take advantage of his stupidity, his muscle, and getting nowhere. Reading the details in the text messages and so on was hilarious. I'm going to paraphrase some of them here. I want to run barefoot through the fields with you. I grew up in Oklahoma. Those fields have cow pies. Gross. I can see my reflection in your eyes. It's the glasses. Run away with me. Take me into your arms. I have guard duty. My CO would have my butt. I want that butt. No, my CO is always telling me my butt is his. Huh? Have you ever wondered what true love is? Ever want to experience romance and deep desire, longing in winds of destiny? No. I'm so lonely. I want movies when I'm lonely. They got a theater on base. I think it's showing Titanic and Goonies. I want to be the rose to your Jack. My name is Steve. What do you think when you look up at the stars? I'm outside. I want you. I want you so bad. I know how that is. I want a good burger. But the ones they have here on base, the grill is only open till 8 and it's like 11. Oh my god, I want a burger so bad. What are you doing? Texting on duty. What are you doing now? Texting on the pot. What are you doing after duty? My CO caught me texting. Oh god, Steve. This question makes me sad because I never get a hint from any girl. Or perhaps you never noticed you received the hints from the girls. One time this girl who I knew had a crush on me somehow got my number and called me. She told me she liked me. I hung up the phone. Back when we had just met, my husband missed many of my extremely obvious and unsubtle hints. I'd say things like, "You should stay here and sleep with me tonight," and he'd say, "Oh no, I'm not tired yet, I'll just go home so you can sleep." Turns out he was super conscious of me being 17 instead of 18, he was in his early 20s. Once I turned 18, he suddenly became aware of all my not very subtle advances. Band trip to Universal. I'd purposefully chosen his group to walk around with, and stayed mostly just hanging out with him. Always tried to sit next to him on rides that required the group to split. Second day of the trip, we went to the second park. We all got butterbeer, and I didn't get a straw, so it was all over my top lip. He says, if you were any other girl, I'd be all smooth and like, "Here, let me help you with that," and kiss you, but I don't think you're like that. I blush and say, "Well, how do you know I'm not like that?" No response. I sat next to him on the bus ride to and from Universal, even took home the stuffed dinosaur he won, and I'm pretty sure I brought him and his friend cheesecake, all while he was pining over some other girl. Apparently our friends were making bets on how long it would take us to get together. Took him a few weeks, but that's my boyfriend, everyone. Hi, sweetheart. I asked a guy if he'd bring some Xbox original games for us to play. In short, it was code for "we're going to bang." He brought over a big bag of games and we played them. I remember one was Time Splitters, which I freaking loved and wish I still had the means to play. I didn't tell him my original plan until a couple of years after we'd started going out. He was just so freaking cute, all super stoked that I wanted to game with him. I remember he came over a little later than planned because he'd been carefully selecting which games to bring. I married that goober. That is the worst "we will bang" hint in the freaking world. Really? That's what it's code for? Oh my god, all of my male friends want to do the deed with me. We would always hang out after classes on our own and I'd rest my head against his chest or lap, depending on whatever was comfiest, when we'd watch movies. I'd play with his hair a lot. I even kissed him on the cheek once. He had no idea. Oh wow, having read this thread, I think a dear friend might be into me. Oh crap. Gorgeous Russian blonde sat next to me in the study hall for a year in high school. Every day we'd push our desks together and playfully kick each other under the desk, hide each other's stuff and do homework together. After I moved states, she berated me for how oblivious I was. In my defense, I was a lanky nerd with low self-esteem. Some of us are very good at rationalizing away hints that we've noticed. For example, I've literally been making out with a girl who told me she is only physical when there's a meaning, then a day later convinced myself it didn't mean that she liked me. Talking on Facebook, I mentioned a new bar near where I worked, and he said he'd never heard of it. I said they had really good Bloody Marys. He said he didn't like mixed drinks. Then I read a Reddit thread about guys, when have you realized too late that she was flirting with you, and realized he had no clue that I wanted to go out for drinks. So I messaged him again and was more blunt about it. We're now married and expecting our second boy any day now. What did you do that unintentionally destroyed someone's life completely? When I was about 8 years old, I was playing golf with another friend. I went for a swing and ended up splitting his jaw into like 10 parts or so. He now speaks a little bit odd 15 years later. I introduced my then roommate to Final Fantasy XI, dropped out of his full-ride scholarship, and dedicated his life to that game. I've known a lot of people who have their entire lives revolve around MMOs, myself included. They can be just as damaging to a person as substances if not careful. Addiction doesn't need an external chemical component. Sometimes the chemical releases from our brains while doing certain activities is enough to cause real addiction. Gaming addiction is as real as gambling and shopping addiction. But I also think someone has to have some issues to begin with for the addiction to be able to take hold. There was obviously something this person was trying to escape from before they were introduced to the game. Happy people don't develop life-destroying addictions. So you know that guy, Count Dankula, who taught his pug to be a far-right extremist and is now facing hate crime charges? I know I'm probably not really the cause, but I posted his video to Reddit because I found it on YouTube with a few thousand views. Then it sort of went viral on Reddit and ended up with millions of views. The attention it got caused him to be arrested for hate crimes, and now he potentially faces years in prison and difficulty finding a job ever again if found guilty. I know it probably would have still gone viral if I didn't post it here, eventually, but I can't help but feel a bit guilty for being the one who first posted to Reddit. Hope the poor guy doesn't get charged. A new guy at my old job, Bill, was bragging about his hot new girlfriend, Cassie. At our college party before we went on leave for 2 weeks, I saw him with a very pretty blonde just kind of standing around. Since he was new, I decided to help break the ice, show them around and meet some people. I walk over, introduce myself, say hi to Bill and then say, "And you must be his girlfriend, Cassie. He's told us some great things about you." He goes as white as a ghost. "No, I'm his wife, Rachel." I didn't know what to do, so I made an excuse that I must have mixed them up with another couple, and made my escape. They got divorced a couple of months later. You know what? I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that Bill absolutely had that one coming. He really set himself up for marital self-destruction in multiple stages, and we only have to feel bad for Rachel for not getting out sooner. Ah, Pat, the alcoholic regular at the truck stop I used to work night shifts at. He used to come in every night for a bottle of Rumplemans before heading home. He was clearly a drunk, but a friendly and good-natured one. One day, he stopped coming in and nobody saw him for over a year. Then during my last week on the job, he comes in to get gas, and I'm so glad to see him that I brought his traditional bottle of booze for him as a gift since I was leaving. 6 months later, I learned that he disappeared for that year to cut his ties to the area, and moved to the West Coast to sober up and get his life together. He'd managed to kick the booze and start rebuilding his life when he came back to town to pick up some things from his old home before leaving the area forever. He was on his way out of town toward a new life when I gave him that bottle. He relapsed and self-deleted a few months later. Not to sound callous, but I've never really felt guilty about it. There's no way I could have known, and I'm sure there were other factors. I do feel sadness, though, that the world lost a good-hearted man who was struggling with his own demons. I am an alcoholic. Most likely he'd already relapsed in his brain. Most people don't relapse when they're sober and are handed a bottle of alcohol. He'd probably been struggling for weeks or days, or had been planning on moving so he could drink without people knowing. Even if you didn't give him a bottle, he probably would have just bought his own eventually. Alcoholism is a pretty crappy disease. My parents. I came from an upper-middle-class family, so my parents paid for everything while I was in college. Housing, tuition, groceries, everything. I had my dad's credit card, and at 20 I started going out to the bar and spending lots of money. They continued to support me, to pay for everything, and I continued to take full advantage for years while ignoring their threats that they would shut off the credit card, which they never did. Then my dad sent me a heartbreaking email one day that said I'd spent all of his retirement money and they were struggling to pay the mortgage. It absolutely broke my heart and I cry just thinking about it. It ruined my relationship with my parents. It's been a few years and I'm making quite a bit of money now. Our relationships are better than they've ever been. At any opportunity I can, I send them money and will continue to do so until they tell me to stop. I'll forever be indebted to them for everything they've done for me, and I'll do anything I can to help them live comfortably for the rest of their lives, because that's what they've done for me. To those who grow up in a loving family, don't ever forget how much your parents love you. Don't ever take it for granted like I did. The one that I'm now trying to unscrew up is my kids' dental health. I spent a few years caring more about pills than I did taking my kids to the dentist or just brushing regularly. Now, when I have to take a kid to the dentist to repair the cavities and/or root canals that I caused them to need, I feel really bad and admit I effed up, and now they're paying for me messing up their lives even in just this one way. When I was 6 years old, I was running around a portable classroom at school while some other older kid was running around in the opposite direction for his own reasons. Our paths converged at the corner and we smashed heads. My forehead was split wide open and I got 13 stitches and still have a straight line scar in the middle of my forehead to remember it by. The other kid, being a few years older and a few inches taller, wasn't so lucky. His eyeball ruptured. I can still hear his screams. I tracked him down on Facebook all these years later to ask if he'd ever want a beer with me, and his response was pretty much, "Yeah, nah, I'm good." I introduced a friend to anime and watched Madoka with him. Ever since then, he's developed a very particular interest for younger anime girls and spends most of his time watching more anime and splurges heavily on figurines, amongst other things. By sophomore year of college, I'd figured out a pretty good rhythm for partying really hard while still getting good grades. At the beginning of the semester, a friend of a friend joined our group. He was a freshman, super smart and also extremely straight edge. He had never drank or had ever really been to a party. None of us pressured him into anything, just invited him to join us. But he started getting into the college party vibe pretty quickly. I guess I just assumed everyone had the same work ethic towards school as me. Even though I went out a lot, like a lot, I still studied every night and never missed assignments. But apparently my new friend didn't get quite as good a rhythm. He started to miss class more and more, went out more and more, and forgot about major projects, amongst other blunders. He ended up failing his first semester of college, and last I heard of him, he joined the military and shipped out overseas. No clue where he ended up. I'll say it doesn't seem so much like he ruined his life as he just didn't try to find the right balance to make himself succeed at school. And joining the military wasn't necessarily a bad thing for him. I know at least one person who was a bit of a screw-up before they joined the armed forces and really got their life together after their service, and even went back to finish their education in a path they knew they wanted to do once they'd had some more time to think and some savings. It was middle school and we were taking one of those state-based tests. I don't really remember the name, but it was the history portion. Our history teacher wasn't the nicest woman and she wasn't fair, so no one was really thrilled to be in her class that day. I remember sitting down, carrying my backpack and tossing it to the side. I was in a bad mood, so I just kind of threw it down, not really caring about it. I just wanted to get this test over with and then take a nap, because they made us put our head down when we're done. 20 minutes into the test and I'm blazing through it. I do love history, so I had no problem, despite our mean teacher. And she was walking along each aisle, checking each person, making sure nobody was cheating. One kid already was yelled at, so we were afraid to look up. I saw her shadow appear from the side, slowly walking down the aisle. Afraid to look up, I stared at my paper, but a scream next to me spiked my head up. "Ah!" She wailed as her elderly body went flying, her body landing on the ground with a big whomp. She had tripped on my backpack. I looked down in shock. "I can't get up! I can't get up!" She wailed on the ground. I was frozen in fear when a teacher's aide ran to her aide. "Go get the principal, everyone out of class," she yelled. We were all rushed into the hall, more teachers arrived, and then the principal. An ambulance came there, as there was a hospital close by, and then she was taken away. "Did you trip the teacher?" John tripped the teacher." It spread like wildfire. I was suddenly the kid who'd tripped the teacher. The next day we had a substitute, and the principal in the class with us as we were about to finish the tests. "This is why you're supposed to tuck your backpacks under your desk, not in the aisles." I never got in trouble for it, and it was never pushed to my family. We got a replacement teacher who was actually really cool, and history became a lot more fun again. I learned later our history teacher did come back. She'd damaged her arm and hip permanently, needing a walker. She was getting medically retired, but came to say hello to some old students. I never saw her, but one of my best friends did. The teacher commented on, "It's important to forgive, especially those who've wronged you." And she stared directly at my best friend at this time, knowing she and I were close. The history teacher left the school that day, never to be seen again. In short, historical progress goes whomp. So a lot of arguments are seeming to pop up, so I want to say this. This was about how I unintentionally messed up someone's life, not how they messed themselves up next to me. I left the backpack there and she got hurt. She didn't deserve what happened to her, even as much as I didn't like her. In my mind, it's still both funny and horrifying to me, even after almost 2 decades. So don't be that kid. Tuck away your bag. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Introduced my classmate to League of Legends last year. Since then, he stopped showing up to school for weeks at a time and then he dropped out. And now he has no plans to do anything but play League all day, every day. My best mates when we were 14 and 15. He was a typical rich kid whose parents paid for whatever he wanted. He was pretty spoiled, but he also understood that you have to work to get things. His dad taught him well. Well, anyway, I got some green herb off of another guy in school and gave him his first session, and after that, we were smoking all the time. He moved back up north not long after and hit the hard stuff, and is now smoking a lot of crystal. I know it's not completely my fault, but I can't help but think if I hadn't given him that session, he would never have got into the heavier substances. According to my ex-wife, I single-handedly ruined her life. Seems to me that if you have a lesbian affair and then empty the bank account before filing for divorce, and my lawyer gets the courts to make you pay me a lot of money, you may have some responsibility in your own demise. Back in the day, I had an extra beta key for City of Heroes, an MMO, which I gave to a friend. He met some girl in the game and they hit it off. Problem was, she was extremely needy and slightly crazy. Told him he doesn't need friends since he's got her. And besides, we're all bad influences anyway. So they broke contact and moved to a new city. More than 15 years of friendship gone. If I'd never given him the beta key, he would never have met her. Probably. There's a lot of people in this group of stories feeling terrible for something that's only really partially on them, where someone else ultimately made the fatal decision. There was as much of a chance of him meeting this person as there were chances of meeting an equally terrible person in any other social forum, real life or online. It was just a freak chance that he met them in the thing you gave him. Your friend and this woman did all the destroying themselves. I can't blame myself too much, but this is all pretty recent, so I feel a little responsible. My best friend growing up used to have his grandpa take us home every day together. In high school, my best friend growing up dated this girl. They dated roughly 2 to 3 weeks and then ended it, so it wasn't very serious at all. Over a year later, I somehow ended up getting close to her and asked my friend if it was okay because of their previous relationship. He said it was fine and to go for it. Well, I did, and he didn't take it too well, but didn't really show it. Me and him had naturally grown apart at this time, and we're still good friends, just didn't hang out together daily. He was a bigger kid, but after that, he started losing weight like crazy. Then, not long after, the remains of his father's body were found. He took this really hard, obviously. We grew completely apart and I continued dating this girl through high school until we broke up senior year. He couldn't handle seeing us around each other, so we pretty much stopped talking altogether. Freshman year of college, though, we reconnected and spent some time together. It started becoming more frequent, and he was coming to parties with me and we'd hang out at his house. Around this time, though, I reconnected with this girl. We had some time apart, and getting back together at our age, we were taking it seriously. My friend didn't disappear this time, but I did notice he'd slowly been drinking more. He was already drinking heavily before we got back together, but I thought it was just like all of us college kids were doing. We all drank, smoked, and generally did nothing if it wasn't schoolwork. One night, though, I went to his house and noticed it was a bit much. I watched him drinking full glasses of gin and eventually blacking out in the backyard. I moved him to his bed and his girlfriend watched him all night. This was the last time we talked and he removed all communication with me. Years go by and I tried to reach back out. Him and his girlfriend had a kid but broke up. He had blocked me on Facebook and if I tried to text or call, he just wouldn't answer. Time just kept going and I always thought about him. 3 weeks ago, I got a call that he'd pulled out a piece and self-deleted in his driveway. You can't help but wonder what you could have done or how much you contributed. I wish I'd reached out. I don't think just the girl coming between us was the sole reason at all. But he had said to his ex that he'd thought about self-deleting before. He said he couldn't do anything right and he didn't have anyone to turn to. His life didn't go how it should have at all. He was top of our class and had such potential, but decided to go to a smaller school at home. He failed out and stopped going while the rest of us moved on with our lives. I wish I would have tried more. Incredibly stupid coworker sent an email to my business account calling in sick. Unfortunately, I was sick that day too, and her husband was my stand-in. He read that mail and called a divorce lawyer because his wife had left the house as usual. When she came home from work, her lover's bed, her husband had already organized a removal company. Sorry, not sorry, cheaters deserve the worst, and she destroyed her own life. What I did was completely unintentional, though. Chatting about people in relationships and whatnot with my colleagues. Chill conversation, friendly banter, then said something about another colleague apparently being with another colleague. I was given such a weird look. A boss asked me where I'd heard that, to which I replied another colleague who was on sick leave at the time because of surgery. They nodded knowingly and we began talking about the weather or something. The colleague on sick leave was fired because they weren't supposed to tell people about the other two being together apparently. My workplace has a good reputation in the industry, and our boss has a lot of connections. If they attempt to get a job in the industry anywhere in the future, they're going to get a less than stellar review from the boss, and will probably have an extremely difficult time finding a job. Whoops. I guess you could describe him as the trenchcoat kid of my middle school. Let's call him Bob, because I don't want to keep referring to him as trenchcoat kid, it just feels wrong. Bob was a pretty troubled kid and was picked on quite a bit by people. One day our class was at a nearby park for a kind of relaxing field trip after midterms. Some of my friends and I were being dumb kids and sword fighting with sticks. I didn't know that Bob was nearby watching us, and during our sword fighting, I swung the stick around behind me trying to be cool. Turns out, I accidentally hit Bob with it, and it was his last straw before breaking. He tackled me from behind and started choking me until I lost consciousness. I was told that one of my friends tried to pull him off while others went to grab the teacher but couldn't get him off me even after I was out cold. He was expelled and sent to a juvenile correctional facility for what basically amounted to attempted murder. I have no idea what happened to him since then, but I wonder how his life would have turned out if he'd gotten help instead of shipped off like a criminal, all because I was being dumb and accidentally hit him with a stick. Well, this definitely rates with the title based on the accidental and unfortunate placement of events. But it does sound like something of this nature was going to happen at some point, and at least in this case, Bob wasn't alone with someone. Neither you nor Bob died. Sad, but probably for the best his imminent outburst happened in a public place. Only sad that he never got to therapy or something before it happened. I'm sure it's not 100% my fault, but I think I had a hand in ruining my parents' marriage. My brother and I refused to sleep anywhere but our parents' bed. Like for an extremely long time. Years. Eventually, my dad started sleeping in my bed and I slept where he slept, next to my mum. This went on for like 2 years. I know they had other problems, but now that I'm a husband and father, I understand how important intimacy is to a marriage. It really helps keep those lovey-dovey feelings rolling. I can't help but think that if they could have shared a bed, there's a good chance they would have been able to work out their other issues. I think they know that too. And yeah, I also understand that they were the parents and I was the kid and they should have told me to F off and sleep in my own bed. I was in high school when this happened, about 4 years ago. I had this classmate, let's call him Kevin, who was quiet and normally kept to himself. Others sort of found him weird, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary with him from my perspective. One afternoon during one of our classes, I see that there's a USB lying under Kevin's chair. At this point, I didn't know whether it was his or not, but I grabbed it anyway. Impulsively, I told my friend with the laptop to load up the USB and see what was inside. We didn't expect to find a crap ton of pictures of people in furry costumes doing the deed in there. Suddenly, Kevin comes bounding in, grabs the USB, runs back to his chair and buries his head in his arms. Turns out, he had certain interests. After that, he was known around our batch for being the weird guy who's into furry stuff. And he has no idea it was me who found his USB in the first place. Man, high school sucks. The older you get, the less anyone cares what twinks your wink. My friend's life and subsequently her family's. Our group of friends decided to just go out one night and party like crazy. We were just being dumb and doing stupid teenage stuff. We were all reckless and thought we were invincible. And then she passed away. While I won't go into extreme detail about what happened, I'll say it was alcohol. She had too much in her system and her body just shut down. I don't feel like it was solely my fault, but I do feel like I contributed to ruining her life because I was there and I was being just as irresponsible as everyone around me. I get physically ill when I see posts about her every now and then. It's even worse when I interact with her parents, which isn't often, and I know that it's terrible, but I can't bring myself to face them. I almost hurled when they were tearfully telling my friends and me stories of my friend's childhood and talking about the things they regretted with their parenting, as if them yelling at her over not cleaning her room or stuff like that while she grew up led to her passing away. Her friends were the worst thing to happen to her. Man, this is hard. My ex, just before we broke up, we were talking about smack and why people go to the lengths they do for it, and he said he'd find us some. It was my idea. Then we broke up. After a while, he called me and said he'd found some. Would I like to come over? I declined because I quit and was only a few months clean from substances at that point. He ended up using it and is now a full-blown addict. This makes me incredibly sad. I've turned my life around, and he wouldn't have brought the stuff if I'd kept my mouth shut. I heard from a mutual friend a while back. She said he lost all of his teeth and his hair is falling out. He was such a great guy, but that stuff ruined him. What unforgivable thing have you done that you'll never tell anyone about? I grew up very poor with dysfunctional parents in a rural area. My siblings and I often went hungry. As the oldest, I always tried to look after them, but one day I failed hard. When I was 7 and my little brother was 5, I was playing outside and he appeared with a bologna sandwich that he had somehow scraped together from what he could find in the kitchen. It was just a single piece of meat on 2 squished pieces of dried bread. No cheese, no condiments, nothing else. When I saw what he had, in a fit of jealousy, I knocked it out of his little fingers onto the ground. He immediately burst into tears and started bending down to pick it up off the ground. Before he could pick it up out of the dirt, the local pack of stereotypical dogs that a poor rural family keeps pushed him over and ate the sandwich. He just lay there on the ground, covered in dust, crying and repeating over and over, "I made it to share with you." I'm now 30 and we have a close relationship, but not a day goes by that I don't think about what I did on that one day out of petty jealousy. I want to apologize, but I really am hoping that he does not or will not remember it. In short, I destroyed the food of my sibling in a starving situation. Update: I talked to him this weekend while working on our cars. He said he didn't remember it. He made such light of the situation that I couldn't even start to explain how sorry I was about it without seeming overly dramatic. I do feel better though. Thanks everyone for talking me into getting this off my shoulders. My best friend and his father were in an accident 5 years ago. We were both 16. His dad was declared dead at the scene and he ended up in a coma for 12 weeks. I spent a lot of time at the hospital and his house and as a result, with his mum. A couple of weeks after the accident, she just broke down completely as she was driving me home from the hospital. She told me she couldn't be alone that night and begged me to stay with her for a couple of hours. We went back to the house and she poured me a glass of wine. I lost my innocence to her. While my friend's life was hanging in the balance and his dad just buried, I was doing the deed with his mum. I'd always had a thing for her. I mean, she was my friend's hot mum. So I obliged every time she instigated, which was a lot. This stopped immediately after he was released from hospital and we avoid each other now. When we were 10, my best friend and I were always bullied by this kid who lived in our complex. He was one of those sneak bullies too, who acted so lovely around adults, but was a holy terror when they weren't around. So one day, after he held my friend down and made him eat dog poop, we hatched a plan to put him out of commission. We found a Windex bottle and filled it with a bunch of different cleaning agents, one of them being bleach. Then we went looking for him. When we found him, he asked my friend if he was still hungry and wanted some more, and then he came over to us. I squirted him right in the face with the bottle, a few good squeezes worth. He ended up going to the hospital with chemical burns and lost all of the sight in one eye and partial sight in the other. He Facebooked me a few years back and apologized for how he treated us and actually thanked me for what we did to him. He said it was a real eye-opener. His pun, not mine. And he now works exclusively with blind children and says it's incredibly rewarding. Good God! The narrator can tell that this is going to be one of those absolutely harrowing videos to make already, given that the last story is the closest thing we have to wholesome content. Yikes! I'm a big guy, 6'2", 280 pounds, bearded. I was walking through the mall one day and went to hitch up my pants. I chose to do that, however, at the exact time that a small Hispanic woman was walking by with her baby in her arms. I accidentally elbowed that baby right in the face. The woman very timidly said, "Oh, lo siento," and ran off in the opposite direction. I was walking downtown one night after leaving the bar around midnight-ish, and I had to walk a few blocks to my car. Parking is awful in the city on a Friday night. Well, halfway there wasn't anyone around. Someone came up behind me and tapped me on the shoulder and told me to give him my wallet or it would be bad, as he had his hand deep in his pocket. I don't really know if he had a piece on him, but all I could think about was getting stabbed or shot, which I really didn't want to go through. So I preempted him, reached for my wallet, and grabbed my knife, put my hand in his face and stabbed him in the stomach 3 times and ran as hard as I could for probably a mile. Never told anyone, never called the cops, as it seemed like that would put me in a worse spot. No idea what happened to him. In short, probably shanked a guy to death. My half-sister, who lived with her father in another state, died of a brain tumor when I was 17 and she was 15. The tumor pressed on her vocal cords, causing her voice to be very high-pitched and breathy. For the last 6 months of her life, I refused to speak with her on the phone because her voice reminded me of her, at the time, untreatable condition and, at the time, inevitable end. This was in 1987 and I still hate myself for it. In short, blew off my dying sister, who I loved very much because I was too scared to speak to her. I was 11 years old. I asked my grandma, who was raising me, to buy me an Oreo McFlurry from Dairy Queen while she was running errands. She didn't want to because it was out of her way. I persisted and she continued to say no. 2 hours later, she came back and stopped her car at the end of the driveway and paused for a while, like she was going to back up and do more errands. I came out to see what was up, and she rolled the window down and handed me an Oreo McFlurry with the biggest smile on her face. I took said McFlurry and threw it down on the lawn because I was a hyper prick and was annoyed that she had said no earlier. I remember her smile going to a what the frick face after I threw it. She died of terminal illness a year later. I'm 24 now, and to this day that's my saddest memory ever. She chose to raise me after she had already brought up her own kids and was the best person ever. I'm so sad this is the first thing that comes to my mind when I think about her. P.S. As you can tell, I'm a piece of crap. I miss you, my mum. Sorry. Living abroad in Australia, I did the deed with my German co-worker who had a boyfriend. She was in the country for 3 years on a domestic partnership visa and only had to stay for 6 more months to get full permanent residency. When her boyfriend found out, he broke up with her and alerted immigration, he was her visa sponsor, and she was deported back to Germany. In short, I screwed my co-worker and screwed her by getting her deported. I was walking in a big city in an area unfamiliar to me in an evening this summer, a few hours before sundown. It was in a residential area, about a 20-minute walk from the city centre. There wasn't a whole lot of people on the street and only a little bit of traffic. Now, onto the actual event. As I walk, a car drives by me and turns in on a street I just passed. The car was going faster than was safe, and I heard a young woman screaming something from the half-open passenger door. I think, crazy jerks to myself, and kept walking, as did everyone else who was out. It was only later that night when I thought back on it that I realized something. That woman had screamed, "Help." I was mortified. The fact that neither I nor anyone else on the street did a single thing to help her made me feel ill. As far as I know, no one checked up on the situation. No one called the cops, no one did anything. The worst thing is, I have no idea what happened to the girl. She could have been a victim of a kidnapping for all I know. Frick. I was climbing a tree with my friend when we were in first grade. I was the better tree climber as he was sort of an inside all the time kind of kid. For some reason, I thought it would be awesome to pee from the top of the tree. While peeing, I thought it would be awesome to pee on him. So I did. At laser tag, I accidentally knocked down a little girl when we collided while rounding a corner. Instead of helping her up, I shot her for the points and ran away. I mean, I think up until the age of 25, I would have been right there with you. Little kids are bouncy, they were probably fine. I mean, yeah, you were terrible, and yeah, I'm laughing. This is something right off a script page of Always Sunny in Philadelphia. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Just a few months ago, I went on a road trip with the wife and kids. On the way back, my son made us take an emergency potty break. When I got out to get him out of the car, I found a wallet on the ground. I picked it up, got in the car, and opened it up. It had several credit cards, SS card, bank card, DL, $879 in cash, and several other items. I looked the guy up on Facebook and sent him a friend request with a message saying I found his wallet. Fast forward about 2 weeks, Don't hear from him, contact his relatives, they have him call me. The guy wants me to bring it to him, a 1.5 hour ride away. I tell him it's not possible, I'm too busy. He says, that's effed up, bro. I say, sorry, but I can meet you halfway this weekend. Guy says, cool. He then tells me he doesn't remember how or when he lost it because he was fricking hammered. Fast forward to the weekend, I arrive at the location he's decided on and I wait for him for over 30 minutes. He finally calls and says, my bad, bro, I was at the bar with my friends and forgot about you. I'll be there in about 10 minutes. 45 minutes later, he shows up, walks up to me and says, 1 second, bro, I've got to take a leak. He's obviously intoxicated, makes me wait while he goes in to pee. For some reason, my inner voice said, frick this guy. So I took the money out of the wallet. Just seconds later, he walks up and I hand him his wallet. He says, thanks, snatches it from my hand and leaves. I don't feel bad at all about this. Not one bit. In short, found a guy's wallet, he was a jerk, I took his $879. I feel good about it. Who the frick carries around almost $1,000 in cash, and then doesn't even check to see if it's still there? I wouldn't kill the person I loved. She was a day from the end of her life. A virus had eaten her liver, and she went yellow. Her liver couldn't filter out water anymore, so her lower half was swelling up. This meant she couldn't move her legs, and she used to be a ballet dancer. She had a Hickman line, which is a tube that connects to an artery in the chest. It's used for putting chemotherapy into the bloodstream. She decided to cut through the tube so that she would bleed to death. She did that, looked at me, and said, why isn't it working? It failed because of blood pressure. If she was lying down, it would have worked. I closed up the end of the tube. I knew she was dying. I knew she was going to suffer another day, but I wouldn't let her die. I even thought to myself, you'd be better off dead, and I was too selfish to let her go. She was always brave, and she chose to die on her own terms. But I'm a coward, and I made her suffer because I'm weak. This was about 20 years ago, so it's been a while. I grew up in New York. The school I went to had about 3 white kids, 2 Hispanic, and 2,300 or so black students. I was one of the white kids. I was a typical inner-city child, listened to punk, skateboarded, and all that. I got jumped a lot. To the point where I eventually left school, but this story is one of the reasons I left. So there were twins at this school, let's call them John and Shantae. They always picked on me. I guess I had a mohawk and liked the dead Kennedys enough to lump me with the skinheads. So all of the white kids at school were labeled as skinheads, even though none of us were. I was standing in front of my locker getting books, and both of them snuck up behind me. I felt a really hard slap on the side of my head where it was shaved, and the pain was actually pretty intense. I turned around to fight whoever just hit me, only to see these two and about 15 other kids. The principal was standing on the other side of these kids with a smirk on his face. I could do nothing except mutter, "You'll get yours, alone." It was later on that day when I got my chance. I saw John walking toward the stairs. It was a 3-story school and we were on the top floor. I lost all self-control as the anger hit me and I ran at him full speed. I actually jumped and hit him with both feet in his back, and the back of his head right as he hit the top of his stairs to go down. He flew the entire 15 stairs or so and hit his head on the wall. He was completely knocked out. I could faintly hear the screams as I flew down the stairs to him. People were telling me to stop, even though I spent many years getting my butt handed to me by these guys and never being able to fight them one-on-one. This was my chance. I hit the landing where his body was lying and I jumped in the air and landed both feet on his head. The sound is something I'll never forget. From what I understand, he had surgery from that. I ended up in a boys' home as well because of it. But to this day, I feel incredibly crappy that I did this to him. It just goes to show what can happen if you spend so long taking crap from people and not having adults who are willing to intervene. Before you say I'm absolutely terrible for this happened 2 years earlier. I'd been skating home with some friends, we were on the road, and who walks out of a store but the twins? They see me and my friends, and the first thing John, the one I drop-kicked, does is throw a full Snapple bottle at me. It hit me right in the nose and shattered the bridge of it. They actually ran while my friends scrambled to chase them down and see if I was alright at the same time. My childhood was a mess. Cue all of us who were ever bullied rating the severity of our treatment against this guy. He had it worse than I think I ever did. I think the absolute worst part is the school principal actively smiling at the ongoing treatment of one of his students. What a worthless educator. Hopefully the author and John both recovered and went on to be better people. I don't know what else you can say about that. While my uncle was dying in a hospice unit, I was cranking it next to him. It was my turn to stay for the night. I was bored and I had a laptop with a decent Wi-Fi connection. And one thing led to another. After I cleaned up, I noticed the room was really quiet and checked his pulse and called the nurse to tell him he had finally passed away. I still feel terrible. Oh God, that poor uncle. And as I ascended into the clouds, I looked back on my earthly body, and there was my nephew pumping his hog. I banged my ex-girlfriend of 3 years for around 6 months while she was engaged. We'd been broken up for about 3 years at this point too. She, quote, needed to make sure she didn't love me anymore. And my wang was in control. 5 out of 10 wouldn't engage in adultery again. I was at Dave & Buster's heading back to my friends with a huge mug of beer in my hands. An oblivious little girl runs right towards me, her head equally level to my mug. I barely avoid spilling a good splash of beer in the process. I yell, "Hey!" and turn around to further chastise the little girl. She looks back at me and trips, falling. Then, wham! The little girl that was chasing the first girl runs smack into my mug. The whole thing empties onto her head. 2 little girls are on the floor crying hysterically, one drenched in beer. Their parents were there in a flash, and the first thing that came out of my mouth is, "You guys owe me a new beer." Frick places that mix a bar scene with Chuck E. Cheese. When I was 6 years old, my buddy and I decided to put a boulder on a seesaw and see if we could make it catapult. We were 6 years old, darn it. I was a weak kid and couldn't get a proper grip on it. I accidentally dropped it and my friend's hands got caught underneath the boulder on cement ground. He started screaming and I got scared, so I just ran away. He stayed like that for a few hours. Okay, here we go. This still torments me to this day. When I was 13 years old, my parents took me to buy a hunting slingshot. I also bought a bunch of large metal ball bearings to shoot. My parents kept the real ammo and told me I wasn't allowed to play with the slingshot when they weren't home. So 15 minutes after we got home, they both left for a few hours. My brother and his friend and I immediately went and took the slingshot out of their room, but couldn't find the ammo. Our house was built on an old hazelnut farm, so there were hazelnut trees around the entire property and a lot of squirrels. We started picking up the nuts that the squirrels dropped out of the trees and started shooting things in the yard. Then, sure enough, the squirrel came down on a really low branch while my brother's friend had a nut ready to shoot. We hadn't been able to hit a single target the entire time we were outside. We sucked! So as a joke, I told my brother's friend to shoot at the squirrel that was 10 feet away. He pulled back and shot the squirrel right in the side of the head. It fell out of the tree and was paralyzed on the left side of its body, but it was kicking with the 2 feet on the right side and was spinning in a circle, making these horrible shrieking noises. There were blood bubbles exploding out of its nose, mouth, and eyeball at the same time. It was screaming this shrill, bloody murder noise, and it was my fault that it was writhing in horrendous pain. I swear to God I could feel the pain it was experiencing. I thought quick and realized I had to put it out of its misery, so I grabbed a big branch off the ground and started hitting the squirrel as hard as I possibly could. It wouldn't die. I was smashing the crap out of that little critter, and it took at least 8 to 10 hits to finally kill it. Once it was dead, I dug a hole and buried the little guy and apologized to it over and over, petting it and telling it I was so sorry. I'm 31 years old now, and after almost 20 years, I still get sick to my stomach every time I think about it. Frick, I suck. A number of years ago, I was addicted to white snow. Part of that addiction was selling it in order to support my own habit, which in itself was a pretty bad thing. However, I took it way further than that one weekend. I had just brought a large amount with the intentions of getting a hotel room at the local Six and hustling out there for the weekend. On the way there, I had a friend in the car with me and he recognized a girl walking and wanted to stop and say hi to her. I pulled over and they chatted a bit and he asked what she was doing. She told him she was on her way to a local area that was known for smack. I kind of laughed to myself because I knew I had the best white snow in the area. She asked what all that was about, so I asked her if she knew how to cook her own. She did, so I told her to hop in, no need for her to get ripped by a smack dealer, I had the best stuff in town. She jumped and we went on our way. My friend had already told me she was a smack working girl, and this got my white snow-fueled insane brain chugging along. When we got to the room, I sold her $10 worth, and she cooked it up and took the very first hit as soon as she could. I swear her eyes got as big as saucers, and she asked if I had enough to keep her going all weekend. I told her as long as she had the money, I could do it. I spent the next 2 days straight watching her buy a small amount, cook it up, smoke it up, leave and do her business, come back and buy a small amount, cook it up, and so on and so forth. I think I made about $2.5 grand off her that weekend while she sold herself out to anyone with $10 or more. I didn't do it because I needed to. I could have sold a larger amount to a few of my regular people and accomplished what I needed to do in order to get high all weekend for free. I just did it because I'd never done anything like that before and I wanted to know what it felt like. While it was happening, I was staying high, snorting. It was a pretty amazing feeling. Looking back on it now, I'm disgusted with myself. In short, rented out a smack working girl for a weekend because I could. I did the deed with a girl while her boyfriend was away at his father's funeral. To be fair, to me of course, she told me they'd broken up and I didn't know anything about the funeral, but I still felt terrible after I found out. Turns out the guy inherited 7 figures though, which he told the girl while dumping her. Dude hated me hard for years, understandably. When did you realize? I'm in a cult! I dated a girl in high school who was a total freak in the bedroom, so when she pressured me into going to church with her, it was hard to say no. First red flag was when they called me Brother Braniel as an introduction. Second red flag was when everyone started yelling gibberish and jumping around. Third red flag was when they brought out the snakes. I actually got some pretty harsh looks because I didn't start talking gibberish and jumping around. It was definitely a case of, "You're here, this is what you do," peer pressure. So that's how I visited a snake-handling Holiness, Alabama backwater church. My college friend invited me to a service at her new church. Later told me that the, quote, church met in a barn and they spent their last service literally vomiting up their demons. 50 or so people just wholly vomiting all at once. I went to my 20th reunion 5 years ago, and the woman who organized it I've known since 3rd grade. Very nice, smart, charismatic, the whole package, and she told me about her self-help and life coaching company. I said that sounds cool and maybe I could benefit. So she said she would hook it up later. I live in LA, and when I got back I had an email introducing me to her colleague, whose email domain was esplosangeles.com, which sounded weird. A quick trip to their webpage and a Google search and I found out she was trying to get me to join NXIVM, which is now all over the news. Google NXIVM, all caps by the way, and steal yourself. I noped right out of there and I'm glad I did, as a bunch of them are going to jail now. The therapeutic boarding school Elan. The first night I got there, everyone told me how I'd get used to everything. And I did. I fell into their trap. I didn't realize how messed up it was until the school got shut down by the FBI and the owner got charged with child endangerment and inappropriate behavior with a student. I got invited to a business meeting for a life insurance company. My wife was looking for business connections and trying to get referrals to her company, so we went along. It was a multi-level marketing life insurance company. It was such a creepy, culty place. Everyone with fake serial killer smiles, constantly talking about how much money they're making. The worst part was the other guests around us were nodding their heads in agreement, taking in the bullcrap hook, line, and sinker. My wife and I just looked at each other, left, and stopped answering that guy's phone calls. We had actually signed up for some insurance through them when we thought it was a normal company. We immediately cancelled and signed up with a real big-name insurance company. The narrator was honestly making bets with himself on when the first multi-level marketing scheme would appear. And in case you're questioning whether they really count, perhaps not religiously, but look at how they acquire and keep their members, and then Google how modern cults do it. The methods are remarkably similar. And just like cults, they tend to destroy regular people's lives. Actually, there was a great discussion about such organizations shortly after. Here it is. My now ex-boyfriend said he signed up for a professional and personal development course. I realized it was a cult when he came back with no personality and a whole new set of esoteric jargon. And any questions I had about it were rebuffed. What, you think it's a cult or something? I mean, you know Apple is considered a cult too, right? I find it interesting that most newer cults aren't really religious. The old doomsday, God's gonna getcha things are a lot rarer. Now it's just a bunch of self-help crap that doesn't even pretend to be about anything other than success. I can't tell if this is worse or better. Which makes lots of money. I think cults today are more about making lots of money off desperate people than they are about gods or the alien spaceship coming. My school's National Honor Society induction involved all of the inductees crowding in a dark room and chanting the National Honor Society pledge while holding candles. I was at a cafe one time and a guy was giving a multi-level marketing pitch to this girl who was buying it hook, line, and sinker. I listened to his pitch for about 1.5 hours. I was working on a paper and he was talking so loudly, and it took that long to figure out what they were selling. It was insurance. He'd already talked about how uplines work, the money structure, promise of making 6 figures a year, and he hadn't even mentioned exactly what they were selling. I work for an insurance company, and I was waiting for a moment for him to get up to go to the bathroom or something, so I could warn her that this was an MLM cult and no reputable insurance company runs this way. But after 3 hours, I got tired of waiting and left. Best of luck with your new lifestyle, lady. I went to a small women's college in Virginia. I only stayed a semester because of the group mentality. They would have constant rituals that were not technically mandatory, but you were weird if you didn't go. One alone wasn't weird, but collectively it was too much. For example, one Founders Day, everyone wore white. We went to the chapel for the ceremony and then walked 2 miles to the graveyard where the founders were buried. We all had to lay roses on the graves and sing the school's song. 4 girls in my class tried to self-delete in the first semester, and my class only had 64 girls. If you discussed transferring, then the dean of the students and the school's counselor would threaten to have you put in a mental hospital for 72 hours. I transferred in secret so no one would find out. I didn't even tell my friends. I'd wake up at 4 a.m. and transfer stuff from my dorm room to be shipped home. In short, went to a women's college, and if you didn't conform, the dean of the students would threaten to put you in a mental institution. I was looking into franchise businesses a while back, and one place offered me the chance to buy in and become a business coach. They had me take aptitude tests, went over my work history, and said that I'd be perfect with my business background. I went to meet them with a group of other potential franchisees at a presentation in a hotel, common for all franchise businesses, and I was like, what the frick? This is a multi-level marketing scheme. The other people there had next to no business experience, and all they were telling us was that we had to find our clients to coach and then read them a script off an iPad app. What's scary is that they're an actual registered franchise business. I'm not going to say that the script they had didn't have useful things that actually could have helped a small business, mainly because I would have to pony up around 100,000 just to see it. Every other franchise I spoke to and turned down, like a food or educational chain, were extremely polite and said, "Best of luck to you." These guys just cut off all contact with me, and I heard later through my franchise broker they were angry. When my Latin club sacrificed a stuffed animal before finals to pray to the gods for good grades. "But sir, the oracle at Delphi clearly predicted that I would score an 87%. You are either mistaken in your grading or intentionally undermining the sacred rights of the gods at Delphi." Had a pretty crappy sales position selling TV and internet in retail stores. It was impulse sales, meaning you're trying to get people to sign up for 2 years of something they just learned about 5 minutes ago. Anyways, there was a ton of rejection, but it was a full commission gig, so you stayed in the field until you closed. Therefore, it required a crap ton of effort and seemingly unending optimism and confidence. Anyways, every morning you'd get fired up with cheers and chants and other activities that involved yelling and team building. This also resulted in there being 10,000 sayings recycled on the daily about sticking through it and taking control of your destiny. Anyway, you buy into the system and the energy, and that's how they get you. One night I was driving home a coworker, and you pay for your own gas, another sweet perk, and he found an article, "Why the company is like a cult." And though he was laughing on the outside, this guy 100% brought it up to be like, this stuff is crazy, right? Needless to say, the article was spot on and he didn't last much longer, and I quit soon after that. After reading that, the narrator is realizing that a door-to-door salesman job he worked just after he finished high school was, if not an actual cult, then kind of cult-adjacent. Right down to the chants we did to get hyped. Luckily, I was so bad at it that I had to leave and go back on unemployment for a bit longer until I found my first actual job in a cafe. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. When I was in middle school, a Jehovah's Witness family showed up and enrolled their kids in public school. One of them, a fairly attractive boy, started flirting with me. I'd always been that weird girl in school, so I obviously fell for him. He told me he wasn't allowed to date per se, but he was allowed to invite people to his church, and if I went with him, we could hang out and it would be just like a date. So I went with him, and that day we were talking about how if you join the church, you cannot speak with apostates or any of your family who aren't witnesses. I knew enough about cults for that to be a big red flag. I was still interested in him though. When he asked me to go again, I politely declined because churchy stuff had never been my speed. Instead, I suggested we sneak out one night and meet. He did, and I used my allowance to get us tickets to some movie. I didn't see him for years after that. His family just vanished. The next time I saw him, it was in a mall. I went up and said hi, only for his grandmother to yank him away, snarling not to speak with that filthy hussy. I'm not trying to be a conspiracy theorist, but I think he was only allowed to flirt with me because they were trying to convert me and my family. In my community, we were pretty well known. My father was the fire chief, and in a small town like this, that's a big deal. I still wonder what happened to that guy though. I once went to my friend's Scentsy party. It was so uncomfortable. I hate scented candles and all that crap. I get headaches from a lot of fragrances, and I have a terrible sense of smell, so I'm really not the target market for Scentsy. Every woman at the party would ooh and ah at each scent. I was pretty indifferent to all of them, and I really didn't want to spend $50 on a candle. But there was so much pressure that I just brought a wax warmer and got the heck out. Never again. I realized I was in a cult after I entered the Oculus Quest subreddit. I was having a crisis of faith in college, and my friend invited me to a megachurch her family sometimes visited. She was singing its praises, talking about how supportive, friendly, and progressive it was. She swore this place would speak to me. One of the issues I had with religion was how old-fashioned it was, how things didn't change with the times, so progressive sounded great. We got there for the 11 a.m. service. There were like 5 services throughout the day to accommodate their massive congregation. And my friend took me through the door for new worshippers and visitors. I was already kind of put off by this. I didn't want to go through the visitors' door because I don't like having special attention drawn to me in a new place. I tried to get my friend to let me go through the regular door, since I just wanted to check the place out and no reason to make a big deal out of it. But she insisted this was how things were done and I had to go. At this point, I'm about to balk. Why is there a separate entrance? Why can't I use the normal door? Are they going to baptize me before they let me in? Because I've been there, done that, and it didn't seem to take. I finally let her drag me in there. She was my ride after all. Inside, there were several staff members, all smiling way too large smiles in the welcoming area, waiting on us newbies. We went up to one lady who gave me a super chipper rendition of the welcome speech that was echoing almost verbatim around us to other newcomers. All are welcome. We don't judge. All faiths, creeds, backgrounds are encouraged. She gave me a free t-shirt, super comfy if I'm being honest, and then a coupon for a free smoothie from the cafe in the church right outside the sanctuary. Now, I grew up Southern Baptist, and the concept of having to pay for something in a church, besides what was in the offering plate, was completely foreign and just this side of blasphemous. I asked my friend what was in the smoothies because I felt it was a more modern way to drink the Kool-Aid, and she wasn't amused by that. But still, free is free, so I took it. We went in, and the music was something. They took popular songs from the time but changed the lyrics to fit the religious theme. After, they had a bunch of people come out and start telling us how the church helped fix their awful paths of sin. They were alleged substance addicts who lost everything to their substances, but it turned around at the church. There were people talking about how giving to the church helped them out of their financial struggles. I mean, excuse me? The minister came out and told us if we were having a rough time mentally, physically, financially, or personally, that giving money to the church would make it better. If it didn't work at first, try giving more. You try giving 10% but no results, God just wants you to give more to spread the word. Try giving 20%. The guy made it clear that giving your time to the church was not as valuable as giving money. He talked about giving massive donations that no normal person could ever afford without losing everything. One guy said that doing this cured him of his gambling. I mean, yeah, because you don't have anything left to gamble. Not really a cure, just an alternative displacement of funds. By the time we left, I felt worse about religion than before. I told my friend that the place felt more like a cult or a really smiley mafia. Wouldn't have surprised me if people telling their stories on stage were just trying to work off a debt to the minister. My friend disagreed and just said that I was jaded. It is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to pass into heaven. That's a very easy saying to understand. It's absolutely insane the mental and ideological backflips that some of these megachurch owners will go through to explain away that saying, and justify the obscene amounts of money that they exploit from their congregation. I don't know whether they believe what they're saying or not, but they're just so blatantly rich and taking people's money away from them that I don't understand how they or the people they take from can justify it. I joined a mum group when I was having my first child. It was a crunchy mum group. For those who don't know, a crunchy mum is kind of like a hipster mum, and the mum groups can get pretty cult-like. I joined the group because of shared ideas. Bed sharing, extended breastfeeding, cloth diapering, and stuff like that. Well, I gave up on cloth diapering and those mums went nuts. They staged an intervention with me and pretty much wouldn't let me leave until I put my kid in a cloth. And that's only some of the things. My parents were part of AmITheA. It's a pyramid scheme, of course, but it's also extremely religious. I'd even classify it as its own denomination of Christianity. They used to have to do meetings, in which they tried to rope friends and family and total strangers they met at work into doing AmITheA too, which began and ended with a prayer even if the people weren't religious or Christian. They'd literally pray for money and wealth. AmITheA worked like a private country within America. It even had its own movies, music, and celebrities. You don't see all of that from the outside. It's not until you're deep into it that you realize how hard they pound this stuff into people. It's a miracle my parents decided to give it up. Going to my first high school football game in South Texas. Real cult vibes. Isogenics and basically the one weekend of seminars that my significant other and I had the chance to go to since it was hosted in Seattle. Yeah. Isogenics comes off as a little cultish. I went to high school orientation with my son. There was a presentation phase where electives and clubs got to talk and tell everyone what they were about. A group of really excited kids got up on stage and started talking about all the great places their club goes and to all of the competitions, without ever saying anything about what they actually do. Before they got done talking, my son watches me pull my phone out and search, "Is DECA a cult?" When typing "is DECA," the occult part was top recommended additional search. I don't think my son is going to join. I've been involved in a number of cults, both as a leader and a follower. You have more fun as a follower, but you make more money as a leader. I was part of a Second Life roleplay sim years ago that was really dark and toxic even though people swore it wasn't, and people kept going back even though they'd leave even more battered than they already were. Everyone was convinced that it had been a wonderful place and that if they just tried a little bit harder, they could make it great again. No one ever succeeded, of course, and after going back and leaving a few times myself, I finally left for good. But something always bothered me that I could never explain. Why did everyone there feel like the city was theirs? Like they somehow owned a stake in the city, like somehow the city had become a part of their very soul, even though it was just a stupid RP sim. Years later, I was researching abuse psychology and found a list of cult traits. I was able to check off just about every single box. Gosh darn place was run like a cult. Turns out most Second Life roleplay sims are. Screw that stuff. When the people who I thought were my friends turned on me, resorting to threats of violence and the unspeakable act and even death because I disagreed with them. The Penn State scandal with Jerry Sandusky. Screw your little kids, we want another national championship, please. Plus the overinflated egos of most Penn Staters. We get it, you go to Penn State and crap on everyone else with no real reason to do so. I've got some friends that go there that aren't like this, but gosh darn, your IQ isn't that much higher than mine, if it is at all. Penn State isn't MIT on an academic scale, nor is it Alabama on a football scale. That place is a cult. Oh boy, I'll try and keep this brief. So I applied to this sales job. Got asked in for an interview the next day. I go there and it's cool, but it seems like they're just telling me how great their business is rather than actually interviewing me. Second group interview arranged. I meet a cute girl. Vibes. The team leader interviewing us buys us coffee and generally seems way too bubbly. Suspicion kicks in. I get told we start Monday. Over the weekend, I matched the cute girl on Tinder. This is kind of a side story, but we started dating over the next few weeks. I got into work on Monday. Morning meeting is basically a fricking circle where the boss man's right-hand man preaches about motivation or ambitions or some crap and waves about how dope Elon Musk's life or Bill Gates or something are, and they all did it by being self-employed. There's like a routine that all the others have learned where they chant certain things whenever the front guy says anything in specific. We role-play training pitches before going out, loud, bumpy music to enforce the good vibes. I already know I'm being played, but I really need the money at the time, so I just roll with it and half-heartedly go into the whole, yep, I'm gonna have this jerky, over-enthusiastic energy if it helps me get sales and stay here until I find something better mentality. Before I even start working, they had literally explained quite honestly how the entire business works with a trickle-down commission system, but it was pretty clear that the way it really works was the following. Someone starts here, then realizes they're earning nothing, then hears all the stories about how successful people have been, realizes they need to take new recruits below them to scrape off their earnings, takes new recruits, then realizes they have to pander to and over-exaggerate how the person below them is going to become rich too, otherwise they'll just quit, and practically get mind-controlled and mind-control others. Hope the person below them gets more people even further below them, and the whole business is about being a deceptive sociopath and deceiving people until you've suckered them enough to train them to also be deceptive sociopaths. As far as I can tell, the management lied about how many sales people got on average to make it look like others were earning more. The business literally had a whole other business above it that was taking a cut of their earnings, and several businesses under it when team leaders' teams got too big. If you're interested in it, you can read about the kind of business at the Devil Corp WordPress. The manager that I worked for is literally pictured on that site with devil horns. I found that site about 2 weeks after I started, and it basically confirmed everything I already knew. It's practically a business and cult that makes its money by what is basically psychology engineering. I told the girl I was dating, who started at the same time as me, everything I knew, and she thought I was a conspiracy nutjob, called me delusional and several other harsh things, and sold me out to the boss. I got called into the office and the manager showed me the texts I sent her. Last I heard, from one good lad who somewhat believed what I had to say, everyone had been talking crap about me behind my back because that's exactly what they want. They want any defectors to become a laughingstock. It's been about a year, but in the UK, these businesses are spreading like wildfire because they're literally designed to just expand and reincorporate into new child companies in different locations. I see people cold approaching other people on the street or at the edge of stores with badges. I normally try to talk to them, confirm what company they're with and who they're affiliated with, and they normally lead back to the same few businesses. I tell them to check out the link I just mentioned and hope that they aren't too brainwashed and that they look into what they're doing. It needs media exposure because really I see more of these people and more of these job postings on boards every month. What was the craziest thing you saw someone do with a company credit card? Buy approximately $65 of gas 4 times in 1 hour. He only had 1 company car but 3 personal cars at home. After an audit, he had been getting away with it for over a year. Had a friend who managed to spend $20,000 on her corporate card over the course of about a year and a half. Apparently, she felt like she wasn't being compensated or treated well at her job, even though she actually was, and would go out and buy things on the card. Dinner, gas, books, makeup, and clothes, among other things. After the fact, she told me that in the beginning she'd been careful to buy things only at places she knew her boss and his partner would shop at, because they were the only other 2 people who had cards on the account. Then later she tossed all reason aside and would basically hijack the credit card bill every month and cut it up and reprint it without her purchases on there, like her boss or his accountant would never notice the discrepancy in dollar amounts. One day her boss called her into his office and she thought she was going to get a raise. Nope. Credit card statements all over the place. The ultimatum was, pay the money back within the week or be charged. She had to beg a relative for the money. The dumbest part was, even after all of that, she still didn't think she was the bad person in the situation. We stopped being friends shortly after that. A co-worker was dating someone that also worked for the company. He used his company card to buy an addition to the girlfriend's house. something like a $20,000 addition. The accountants caught it and started digging around to figure out why we had bought so much wood, drywall, and other building materials. Finally, someone got the idea to start driving around and looking at the employees' homes, and found the huge addition on the girlfriend's house. They were both fired for theft. The best part was it wasn't even her house, it was a rental. Once she lost her job, she couldn't afford the rent anymore and got evicted. I'm sure that the landlord was laughing his butt off at the whole thing and got a nice free addition to the house. Well, I guess the same kind of person who tries to add a massive section to a rental would be the same kind of person to spend $20,000 on renovations on a company credit card. I've never had one of those, just things like per diem with my jobs, but to be honest, it sounds like way more trouble than it's worth. No thanks. I was bartending one night. It was a Thursday, so karaoke was going on. A guy walked in a business suit and walked up to the bar and said, "As long as I'm here, everything is on this card." I said, "Sure enough, what would you like to drink?" And he said, "When I say everything, I mean every drink, shot, and food for every person." He stayed until closed and tallied up a huge bar tab, tipped 50%. I came to find out he had been let go, but the company forgot to take his credit card. I don't know whatever happened legally, but I made close to $1,000 in tips that night. Back when I was in high school, I took a cooking class. This is in a small town where the grocery store is only a stone's throw away from the high school, and cooking students are often sent to the store to pick up ingredients. When a student would do this, they'd get a little card, which they used to pay, and they'd have to sign a little form at the till. I did this several times. So this one day, the teacher asks one kid to go to the store to get oats. He comes back with a bag completely full, and when he's asked how much he spent on oats, he responds, "About $200, as if that was a completely normal amount of money to spend on oats. I wish I was kidding. I remember reading what someone did to get fired on their first day. He went out on the corporate card and brought like 6 suits on his corporate credit card on his lunch break. I worked at an exotic dance club back in the 90s, and a customer ran up a $3,500 tab on his corporate Amex and left without closing it out. A few days later, we got a visit from the police as he reported the card stolen. Thing is, he was a regular, and we had plenty of video footage of him getting lap dances while wearing his corporate-issued polo shirt. He not only got fired, but was charged with filing a false police report, which led to his wife divorcing him for being such a pole dancer-loving idiot. A guy bought a diamond ring for his wife. When it was brought up to him, he said he was going to pay it off, except he never mentioned it to anyone until he was caught. Instead of firing him, they took it out of his next 6 or more paychecks. Nice interest-free loan for him, I guess. I used to audit corporate card purchases for a Fortune 50 company. I caught a guy trying to buy a $30K boat from Base Pro and a $15K walk-in humidor. We had a co-worker, may he rest in peace. He spent £13,000 in the adult dance club with the company card. He would have spent more if the card hadn't blocked it. He self-deleted the next day. I think it was a big FU to the company. I don't know that this was dumb since it was technically legit, but it's still shocking to me. I was at a conference with the big partners from my firm and got invited out to dinner with them and a prospective client. There were about 8 of us in total at a nice steakhouse, and I'm a wine fan, and they had a nice list. Partner indicated that my counterpart with the client also liked wine and that we should order a few bottles. Partners and CEO were drinking scotch. When we got the tab, it was $17,000. I was, of course, the only one surprised by this. It was worth it, too, since we probably billed the client within the first week, but damn. I once ran an audit for a company, who through my audit found out that an employee was using her manager's credit card to foot her personal purchases. Stuff on the receipts included massive orders for protein bars, endless entries to PayPal, and even tickets for 2 to an NFL game. Thousands of dollars, and apparently no regret was shown as she was getting canned. So stupid. A guy I know took his family on a ski trip to Aspen, every year for 8 years. A few years back, it came to light that my mother, the head accountant at a mid-sized company, had been using company cards and creative accounting for nearly a decade to the tune of at least $100K. They stopped investigating when they hit that number because it was enough to pass the threshold for the maximum felony penalty, which is 25 years. We became aware of her crimes when she went missing and ended up attempting self-deletion the night before her arraignment. Her attempt was unsuccessful, but she finally went through with it a little more than a year later on the night before she was set to begin serving her sentence. The whole thing has upended my life. At my company, we once ran an audit, probably coming from the board. It turns out our CISO was charging over $30,000 a month on her card by breaking pretty much every corporate expense policy there was. All flights were first class, hired personal drivers everywhere she went instead of taking a taxi, $200 or more dinners at high-end restaurants almost every night, suites at the nicest hotels and resorts in the area, and $300 or more on spa visits at any hotel that had one, among other things. She was promptly asked to step down. Also had a senior manager who knew he was getting fired, and he went out and bought all of his employees everything that he could, just barely within the policy, so the company would have trouble coming after him for the money. New laptops, additional monitors, company cell phones, briefcase bags, and approved any and all training they wanted to take, even if it required unnecessary travel. I think he racked up almost $40,000 in his last week with the company. I had an employee buy a used car with his. I had another employee pay a court-ordered penalty with it, and had one more draw down cash to buy substances with it. Alcohol, working girls. 20 years in people management, I've seen it all. My first day on the job, a Starbucks employee charged my corporate Amex card $4,500 for a latte instead of $4.50. Oh well, Starbucks is famously overpriced, but yes, on second thought, that does look a tad pricey even for them. Coupled with a 15% tip, I hope you had fun explaining it to your boss. Rest in peace, expensive coffee consumer. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Guy was overseas on a business trip in Eastern Europe and in an establishment he shouldn't have been in. Decided to buy a round of drinks, figuring no one would know from the name of the place what it was. Unfortunately, later he was enjoying the pleasures of a lady that worked in the establishment and having run out of cash, forgotten he had used his work card to buy the drinks when agreeing to specific services being offered by the employee, and was then surprised to be questioned by the FD a month later on why a restaurant he brought drinks in was also charging him a €50 supplement for doing it in the butt. Worked at a retail company that gave all of its store managers corporate cards. The cards had high limits on them, so the store managers could use that instead of maintaining petty cash on hand or having to use personal cards while traveling for training. While visiting one of the stores, I asked where their Keurig machine was. I wanted a coffee, and the closest Starbucks was a few blocks away. I'd seen the manager's expense report with a purchase for a Keurig machine, K-cups, a small bathroom fixture, and a few other things. The assistant manager says, "We don't have a Keurig machine." After looking into it further, it turns out the manager had been using the card to buy several personal items over the last few years. Ended up repaying a little over $20,000 in purchases. When working away, while not officially authorized but never queried, it was generally accepted the manager there would take the workers out for a couple of drinks at the end of whatever we were doing. Not a crazy night out or anything, but a round or two at the nearest bar to where we were staying. The manager had been out most of the day with another boss drinking when we finished work late in the afternoon, and we went to the bar to have a few beers and something to eat at the hotel we were staying at. "It's okay, I'll get this one." And about 5 rounds later we were all like, are you sure this is fine?" "Yeah, it's okay." I'm a decent drinker, but even I was off my butt at the end of the night. I woke up at around 10 a.m. to go down for food. Apparently the majority of the booze drunk that night went on the card. We officially didn't get in trouble, but now you can only use the company card for sanctioned work events. Not quite a corporate credit card, but in the same vein. Many years ago when I was in college, our student government had a retreat near the start of the year. The college agreed to reimburse for food, so they submitted their receipts, including their liquor store receipt. Not only will the college not pay for alcohol, drinking was forbidden at school-sponsored events. Apparently, this fact was made abundantly clear to the student government. The entire government had to resign and new elections were held. My roommate went to a networking thing out of state paid for by the company. All the salesmen had corporate cards for taking out clients and such. The second night there, they all headed to the exotic dance club. One of the new guys charged about $500 on his card at the club. He reported it stolen after the trip, and as far as I've heard, nothing came from it. Dude tried to pass off a $350 spa package as a gift for a client. Problem is, we have no clients based near us, the closest being some 2,000 miles away. My boss wasted $127 on iTunes to download some music. A guy lived across the country and commuted at the beginning and end of every week. For the first few months, any of his flights or lodging expenses could be covered by the company per his contract. After that time expired, he was expected to have either moved here permanently or start covering his own transportation and hotels if he chose to keep commuting every week. He simply never stopped charging his company card for it. He tried to get clever with it too. He'd route his flights through other cities and pretend he was conducting business there, so they were technically supposed to be covered by the company, and would lose hotel receipts thinking it would be impossible to prove that the hotels he was staying in were local to us. After nearly a year of catching these things and having to make him write the company a personal check every month, they finally fired him. When the army first went to a travel card system, they initially used Amex. The card had no limit and were activated at all times. One of my soldiers went out and brought a set of rims for his personal vehicle to the tune of $2,500. Now there are limits and the cards are deactivated until needed. Invited their landlord out to a night on the town in lieu of rent payment, and told the company it was for a sales lead, so they charged the dinner and drinks to the company card. Basically, free rent. Purchased lavish dinners at a local surf and turf, copious amounts of liquor included, for himself and his mistress. They were both married and his wife actually had a chronic illness. He then claimed that the expenses were staff appreciation events. What actually got him fired was when the auditors came and asked employees, "What did you do at the staff appreciation event on X date?" And we were all like, "What staff appreciation event?" Honestly, at the time it was hilarious that this was what resulted in his firing, since he was doing so much else that was much worse. He hired his mistress, slept with her at work, and fired everyone who caught them at it. She hired another relative for basically a janitorial role and paid him $30 an hour, when the going rate for those kinds of positions are generally $10 an hour. He cut salaries without cause and claimed it was because they'd maxed out, never attended meetings, he stopped paying company bills, Large Corp had us on must prepay cash only, which is unheard of in our industry, and he did many other things like this. But the use of the corporate card was what he finally got canned for, since it was the easiest for them to prove. This guy sounds like the complete package of what you picture when someone tells you to think of a corrupt corporate boss. That complacence at restructuring the entire workplace just to enable his filthy habits is just so damn typical. He definitely deserved the firing. During the 2008 recession, the president of the company took a pay cut, so he just started putting everything on his company card. All the gas for his family's cars, dinner for his daughter's volleyball team, TV for his son's apartment, and so on. No real attempt to hide any of it. The accounting department started complaining about it, and he told them to just put it in. Finally, the head accountant just said no, she couldn't sign her name to this stuff anymore. The president of the company fired her on the spot, even calling the police to help escort her out of the building, telling them he suspected her of embezzling but couldn't prove it, but he feared for his safety. A year later, the scumbag golden parachuted out of the company, and the company barely survived. Using the company card to buy gas for a company car that was on a paid fuel card separate from the company credit card, and then also expensing the receipts for both the credit card fuel bill and the driven mileage. I used to review credit card purchases. Employees would have to submit receipts and explain what each line item was for. One guy brought a $500 watch and wrote down on his spreadsheet, "Watch to replace my broken one." Apparently he felt his personal wristwatch was work-related and worthy of replacing with a Swiss watch with automatic movement. I'm horrified to even have my corporate card in my wallet, but I did show it to a cashier to get a student discount. He asked if I had a student ID, so I flashed my university corporate credit card and he believed it. A little different, but my former coworker didn't have a corporate card, so he expensed and was reimbursed for parking tickets because there was no legal parking in Philly. I once brought a Toblerone and I got caught. A guy I worked with went down a dark road, like leaving Las Vegas dark. He maxed it in a month on booze and electronics. A trip was in there too. He lost his job and moved to Arizona. Buy a $20,000 mail-order bride, frantically try to get money to pay it off, obviously can't hide it, and gets fired. Did he at least get to keep the bride, or did the company take possession of her too? I have no clue. Old company I worked for. Give guy corporate credit card to go buy groceries for the home he was working at. 3 hours later, he didn't come back or return calls. My boss looked at the account to see if there was any action on it. Lo and behold, a $600 charge at a Best Buy. Safe to say the guy thoroughly stepped in it and was not answering his phone, but did respond to a text message that basically said, "Frick you, I quit," the next morning. He was also thoroughly disappointed when he came to get his last check and realized it was about $30. Late 90s, the superintendent of my local school board district used a district credit card to buy about $300 worth of dinners and booze for school board members during a business trip in New York. Got charged with theft because of the alcohol purchases, even though he reimbursed the district when he did his expense report. After a lot of investigation and court time, the superintendent was fined $100 and had to resign. He then had to settle for becoming the superintendent of the Houston Independent School District, the 7th largest district in the nation. That'll learn him. Give it to an exotic dancer before passing out. They swiped as many times as possible before leaving. He allegedly paid the $10,000 bill out of pocket so he wouldn't be discovered. My dad and I bought Pokemon cards. Granted, it was his business. Buy lunch at Hooters for his employee because he wanted to be friends with him. He had only recently gotten the card back because it was taken away after his last purchase of an $80 magic kit. I rented a Lamborghini with mine, but I didn't expense it to the company, so it's fine, as long as I paid the bill by the end of the month, which I did. I just wanted to cross that off my bucket list, and I don't have any credit cards of my own, so I took the opportunity. Epic all-day drink-a-thon at the pub during a team meeting that was supposed to be 2 hours. 8 hours later, and covered in someone else's spew with my tie wrapped around my head, I stumbled back into the office. At the next Christmas party, the boss head-butted the supervisor who was responsible. He was a real jerk anyway, although I felt bad for him as he was an alcoholic. Yeah, the company is no more and still owes me $4,000. My old boss took me and a few co-workers out for a few drinks to celebrate my last day. Dropped about $5,000 on the entire night. About half of that was at the exotic dance club. I was 16 and I got a corporate card for my first job. As I was so excited, I posted a Snapchat of me and the card while some rap song about money was playing and you could see every number, but I deleted it a little bit later. That's probably why most jobs for 16-year-olds don't get corporate cards. A few years ago, my boss, at the time, sent me with the company card to buy him a calculator. I asked no questions and promptly returned with said device, only to watch him open up Microsoft Excel and say that he was finally going to be able to finish his totals column. I love this one, nowhere near the blatant corruption of some of the others, just a whole kind of other stupidity. It's almost cute. This is a Michael Scott blunder right here. There's not even any evil intent or gross skeeviness like most of the others. Just a sweet dumb boy trying to do his job. I had a boss who had a quick meeting with someone in Sydney, Australia. Naturally, he wanted to fly first class. Well, he couldn't be without his wife, so she came too. And his kids? Sure, let's throw them on the bill. Well, they couldn't possibly sleep anywhere nasty, so they got 2 suites in a 5-star hotel. Lunch and dinner every day for 4 people, plus entertainment, all on the company dime. For that 1 2-hour meeting, he and his family spent 3 weeks on a luxury holiday in Australia. Now it's been many years, but I believe the flight bill itself came to $35,000. Hotel was $30,000. Dinners, show, entertainments, amusement parks, sure, why not? And fancy wines were an equally large sum. In the end, seeing as this was a small company, 3 people were made redundant because this guy drained the pot. He was the CEO after all. He quickly came back as a contractor. So his punishment for ruining the lives of 3 people and costing the company $100,000 was that his family got a nice holiday and I guess he had to follow some different tax laws or something. Must be nice to be the CEO, huh? And I've just checked on the company, they've recovered, they're doing a booming business, and he's gone. Buy a water pick to water their plants. I accidentally pocket-bought my friend's racy adult novel off Amazon because yay, one-click ordering. I've never been so glad that they're reasonable about returns for accidental digital purchases because I did not want to explain to our purchasing officer why our department bought a book of vampire adult material. Lesson learned. Always log out of your work Amazon account. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.